Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into something a little heavier. A world of empty stomachs, swollen glands, and the kind of wars that start because someone sneezed at the wrong lord. We're diving into how medieval peasants somehow survived a world designed entirely to destroy them. Before we descend into the hunger, plagues and wars that turned life into an extended bad dream, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you actually enjoy what I do here. No pressure, but my self-worth depends entirely on algorithmic validation. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. Bonus points if you're listening in bed, under 5 layers of weighted blankets that a medieval peasant would sell their soul for. Dim the lights. Turn on a fan for that soothing medieval breeze, minus the airborne diseases. Let's begin. Congratulations! You've just been born into medieval Europe. Take a moment, soak it in. The damp air, the smell of wet animals, and that faint aroma of something burning, which might be your neighbour's roof, or just your family's dinner. Welcome to your new life as a medieval peasant, where your identity is as fragile as the wooden floor beneath your dirt-stained feet. And good news, you don't have to worry about career choices, dreams, or self-actualization. Those concepts haven't been invented yet. You are who you are, a peasant, because God said so. Or at least that's what your priest says. And frankly, no one's brave enough to argue. Your parents were peasants, their parents were peasants, and you will pass that proud, miserable torch onto your own exhausted children, assuming you live long enough to have any. Your name? Something humble and practical. Maybe John if you're a boy, Agnes or Marjorie if you're a girl. No middle names, no last names, unless you're unusually important or involved in tax disputes. Most people in your village identify you by your father's name or your profession. So you're John the miller's son, or Agnes the baker's daughter, or let's be honest, Marjorie, the one who survived the fever. You are born into serfdom, which is medieval Europe's charming way of saying you are free to do anything your lord allows, which is very little. You don't own land. You rent it with your labour, your soul, and occasionally your firstborn child. You pay taxes to your lord, tithes to the church, fees for using the mill, and bribes to avoid punishment. The only thing you own outright is your suffering, and maybe a chicken, if you're lucky. Social mobility? No, that's not a thing here. Your station in life is fixed like a fly trapped in amber. The noble class above you is as untouchable as the stars, and the only way you'll interact with them is if one rides through your village, ignores your existence, or accidentally tramples you beneath his horse. If that happens, your family might even owe him compensation for damaging his horse's hoof. Education? That's adorable. You don't read, you don't write. The alphabet is a mystery, and books are locked away in monasteries where monks squint at illuminated pages you'll never see. Your knowledge consists of oral stories, crude drawings scratched into dirt, and the occasional sermon shouted at you in Latin, a language as comprehensible to you as advanced particle physics. But you nod along anyway because not nodding looks suspicious. You are part of the vast grinding machinery that keeps medieval Europe barely functioning. The peasant class, which makes up roughly 85–90% of the population. You are the backbone, the underbelly, the uncredited extras in history's great drama. The knights get songs, the lords get chronicles, the clergy get stained glass windows. You get back pain, foot rot, and an early grave. From the moment you're old enough to walk, your training begins. Not in reading or arithmetic, but in survival. You learn how to gather firewood without angering the foresters, how to avoid stepping in dung while chasing geese, how to patch your own ragged tunic with threads pulled from old sacks, how to carry water from the well without spilling half of it on your bare, frostbitten feet. Life isn't about thriving, it's about enduring, day after endless day. Your birth was not celebrated with cigars or balloons. Your mother likely delivered you on a straw-stuffed cot, while several neighbouring women hovered nearby, offering whispered prayers and occasionally boiling water, though no one's quite sure what the boiling water is for. If you survived birth, and that's not guaranteed, you immediately began your lifelong dance with death. Infants are fragile, and many don't make it past their first year thanks to infection, starvation, or a bad winter. Your survival is your first accomplishment, and one you will need to replicate every single day moving forward. You are baptized quickly, sometimes within hours, because if you die unbaptized, your soul is at risk. At risk of what exactly? No one knows. But the priest said it with enough conviction that your terrified parents weren't about to take chances. God watches everything here. So do the saints, the angels, and the disapproving eyes of your entire village. You will likely never leave this village. Its boundaries define your entire world. The nearby stream, the fields where you toil, the church that rings its bells, and the forest you're mostly forbidden to enter, these are your borders. Travel is dangerous, expensive, and deeply unnecessary. As far as you're concerned, the next village over might as well be the moon. Your personal ambitions? Simple. Stay alive, avoid fines, keep your head down, and pray your children outlive you. Anything beyond that is considered suspicious ambition, the kind that gets noticed, and not in a good way. If you have any ambitions at all, it's hoping your lord doesn't raise taxes again this year, or that the miller doesn't short you on flour, or that the winter won't steal one of your siblings before spring. At any given moment, your existence balances on a knife's edge. Disease, famine, war, and random bad luck hover like vultures over your life. But you endure, because there's no other option. No safety nets, no second chances, no distant relative with a spare guest room. The only guarantee is hardship, and your only comfort is that everyone around you is suffering too. Misery loves company, and medieval peasants have plenty of both. You're not important. Let's just get that out of the way now, so we can all adjust our expectations accordingly. In medieval Europe, importance is measured by bloodlines, land ownership, and proximity to someone who occasionally talks to the king. You, however, are a speck. A replaceable gear in a very squeaky, very rusty machine. Your birth was not announced by heralds or scribes. No town crier shouted your arrival to the villagers. The only audience was your exhausted mother, a midwife with questionable hygiene, and a few chickens that never asked to witness this event in the first place. You are a peasant, and that word follows you like a bad smell. Though to be fair, bad smells follow everyone here. Peasant means you work the land, you answer to your lord, and you keep your opinions very much to yourself. You're not allowed to leave the manor without permission, and even if you did, where would you go? The next village over has the same problems, just with slightly different livestock. Let's talk about your living arrangements. You live in what some might generously call a hut. One room, dirt floor, no insulation, no windows. The roof is thatched with straw that leaks like a broken barrel every time it rains, which is often. There's a hole in the wall that serves as ventilation, a luxury feature designed mostly for letting smoke escape while letting in the cold. The walls are made of wattle and daub, essentially sticks covered in a charming mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. You don't question this. You've never known anything else. To you, it's home. To anyone with functioning nostrils, it's an olfactory assault. Privacy? Not a thing. You shared a single room with your parents, siblings, grandparents, and possibly a few cousins who showed up one day and never left. At night, everyone huddles together for warmth, wrapped in scratchy wool blankets that smell like goats and despair. You've never slept in a bed by yourself, and you never will. The family pig also lives indoors during the winter because livestock is valuable and thieves are common. That pig is warmer than you are, better fed than you are, and honestly, probably happier than you are. You bathe, rarely. Not because you don't want to, but because hauling enough water for a full bath requires half a day's labour. The village well isn't close, and the water isn't exactly crystal clear. Plus, people believe that frequent bathing opens the pores to disease. And, with your luck, you don't need to invite more opportunities for suffering. So you accept your layer of filth as a protective coating, much like the layer of soot that covers the inside of your hovel. Your clothing, singular. You have one outfit, possibly two if you're scandalously wealthy, which you aren't. Your tunic is made of coarse wool, hand-stitched by your mother or some distant relative who lost a thumb to the spinning wheel. It itches constantly. It's been patched and repatched so many times that it now consists of more patch than original fabric. Underwear is optional and, for you, non-existent. The chafing is a permanent part of your daily experience. Shoes, if you're fortunate. They're made of rough, untreated leather that offers as much support as a soggy biscuit. If you don't own shoes, which is likely, you simply walk barefoot over mud, rocks, thorns, and the occasional sharp chicken bone. Your feet are calloused, cracked, and frozen half the year. Frostbite is called bad luck, and you know several people missing toes. Your hands are your tools. They're rough, blistered, and permanently dirty. The cracks in your skin collect grime that never fully washes out, even after hours of scrubbing. Your fingernails are short, chipped, and caked with the remnants of today's labour. Soap is a luxury item reserved for the nobility or the occasional church festival. You cleanse yourself with ash and water, which leaves you approximately as dirty as when you started. Your teeth? You don't want to know. Dental care doesn't exist, and even if it did, you couldn't afford it. By your mid-20s, your mouth looks like a medieval battlefield. A few teeth missing, others blackened and wobbly, all of them aching. Toothaches are constant companions, and the only known treatments are prayers, alcohol, and eventually yanking the offending tooth out with pliers heated over a fire. Anesthesia is not part of the process. Screaming is. Your diet? Let's just say it's not nutritionally balanced. You eat what you can grow, and you grow what your Lord allows. Most days, your meals consist of pottage, a thick, gloopy stew made from grains, root vegetables, and whatever scraps are available. Sometimes it's been simmering for days, occasionally weeks. It's not so much a recipe as it is an evolving science experiment that occasionally grows new flavours when you're not looking. Protein? Rare. Meat is a luxury reserved for holidays, weddings, or funerals. sometimes all three at once if you're feeling efficient. Chickens lay eggs, but most of those go to your lord or the church as taxes. The occasional rabbit might fall into your trap, but hunting game animals is illegal and punishable by death. You eat it quickly, quietly, and hope no one notices the sudden absence of wildlife. Bread forms the cornerstone of your diet, but not the fluffy white loaves you're imagining. Your bread is dense, coarse, and sometimes bulked out with sawdust, acorn flour, or ground bark during lean years. In particularly bad seasons, you might even encounter ergot, a delightful fungus that grows on rye and can cause hallucinations, convulsions, or death. Every meal is a gamble, and you always lose something. Water, contaminated. The village stream doubles as a dumping ground for human waste and dead animals. You drink weak beer instead, even children, because boiling the water during brewing makes it marginally safer. It's called small beer, low alcohol, high survival. If you're lucky enough to live near a monastery, you might even taste wine once in your life. Don't get attached. The church oversees all of this. Your local priest is both your spiritual guide and the medieval version of a neighbourhood watch. He knows who tithes, who confesses, who skips mass, and who whispered something scandalous near the miller's wife. Missing church services isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous. The priest speaks Latin. You don't. You trust him to interpret the word of God, whether or not he actually knows what he's talking about. You are constantly reminded that suffering is your path to salvation. The church tells you that God loves the poor, but suspiciously, he seems to love the rich a bit more. Every misfortune is God's will. Every illness is a test of faith. Every crop failure is a punishment for your hidden sins, which may or may not include secretly wishing you had softer bread. You tithe 10% of everything you produce: wheat, eggs, chickens, or whatever measly coin you've managed to scrape together. Failure to tithe? That's not just economic mismanagement, that's spiritual rebellion. You pay even if it means going hungry. Your holidays are dictated by the church calendar. Saints' days, holy days, feast days. But don't be fooled by the word feast. Most of these involve fasting, prayer, and sitting through sermons while your stomach growls loud enough to interrupt the liturgy. And let's not forget the Lord of the Manor. He owns your land. Technically, everything you own belongs to him. The grain you grow, the animals you raise, even your labour, it's all his. You work his fields, repair his roads, and sometimes serve as an unwilling soldier when he picks fights with neighbouring lords over minor insults or poorly negotiated marriages. When your lord smiles at you, you pray it's not because he wants something. Taxes, rents, duties, they never stop. The mill charges you to grind your grain. The oven charges you to bake your bread. The wine press takes a cut of your grapes, assuming you ever have any grapes. You pay fees for grazing animals, collecting firewood, and even for permission to marry. If your daughter marries outside the village, your lord might demand a fee to compensate for the loss of future labour. Justice, arbitrary. If you steal, you might lose a hand. If you gossip about the wrong person, you might find yourself wearing a scold's bridle, a metal mask designed to humiliate and silence you. If you complain too loudly, you might simply disappear. And yet, somehow, you wake up every day and continue. You don't belong to yourself. That's not poetic. That's legal. You are bound to your lord's land under a system called feudalism, a cheerful arrangement where everyone owes someone something, and you owe almost everyone everything. You can't sell your land because you don't own it. You can't move away because you'd be hunted down or fined. You are, in the most literal sense, property adjacent. You're a serf, which is technically not slavery. But let's be honest, it feels awfully familiar. Your labour is not just expected, it's extracted. You work your assigned fields, but also your lord's personal domain, his private land. That means after you finish backbreaking work for him, you crawl back to your own pathetic patch of soil and try to grow enough barley and turnips to keep your family alive. If you're lucky, your wife hasn't pawned the family goat yet to pay off another arbitrary tax. The Lord rarely visits your hut. He lives up in the manor house, which may as well be Mount Olympus for all the access you have to it. If you ever see him up close, it's either a rare feast day, or he's come to collect more grain, or he's selecting peasants for yet another ill-advised military campaign. His smile is not comforting. His interest is never good news. You address him as "my lord," you bow, you step aside, you lower your eyes, always. You're not allowed opinions, grievances, or suggestions. You are the background scenery in his play. Decorative, functional, replaceable. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how little control you have over your own existence. Marriage? You must ask permission to marry, and you may need to pay for the privilege. If you marry someone from outside your lord's lands, there may be an additional merchant fee because your labour is effectively being transferred to another lord's estate. Your children automatically inherit your status, which means they too will be peasants. There's no concept of starting fresh or making a new life. The system simply resets with your offspring wearing the same rough wool you did. Inheritance is equally rigid. If your father dies, you may inherit his strip of land, but you will owe more fees to the lord for the honour. If you're the younger sibling, tough luck. You get nothing. Maybe you'll work your brother's land. Maybe you'll become a servant. Or maybe you'll join the church, assuming you can convince someone to sponsor you, which is unlikely because literacy isn't something peasants dabble in. Speaking of literacy, let's be very clear. You cannot read. Letters are mystical runes etched by people who live in stone buildings, wear fancy robes, and speak languages you've never heard spoken aloud. Latin is the language of the church, of the law, of knowledge itself, and it's as distant from your world as flying machines or electric light. You've likely never even seen a book. The village priest might own one, a beautifully illustrated manuscript, copied by monks who spent years painting decorative initials while ignoring the fleas nibbling their ankles. You, however, are illiterate, completely. Even your numbers are limited to basic counting, enough to track how many sacks of grain you owe in taxes. Beyond that, you deal in memory, superstition, and oral tradition. Stories are passed from mouth to mouth, distorted and exaggerated across generations. History, for you, is a rumour whispered by old men at the tavern. Your knowledge of the world is microscopic. You know the weather. You know your field. You know your family's aches and fevers. You know how to plant barley, how to pluck lice from your child's scalp, how to stack firewood without angering the steward. You know which neighbour is cheating on his tithe, which widow whispers with the herbalist, and which local pigs mysteriously gained weight after your neighbour's last hunting trip. The outside world, kings, queens, foreign lands, these are distant legends. The king might as well be a mythical creature. You might hear his name in prayers or songs, but you will never see him. You won't even see a noble higher than your local lord unless war accidentally spills into your village. The affairs of royalty do not concern you, unless they result in higher taxes, or your son being conscripted into some lord's doomed military adventure. Geography? You barely know what lies beyond the forest bordering your fields. The great cities of Europe are foreign planets. Paris, London, Rome. These might as well be carved into the moon. The ocean is something you've heard about from travelling merchants who speak of giant waves and monstrous fish. You assume they're lying. Travellers are rare, and when they arrive, they're treated with suspicion and curiosity in equal measure. Merchants, pilgrims, and wandering minstrels bring news from far-off places. Tales of distant wars, kings dying, plagues spreading. But none of it feels real to you. Your life is this village, always has been, always will be. Your calendar is not based on months or years. It's built around a rhythm of labour and the endless grip of the seasons. Spring means planting. Summer means tending. Autumn means harvesting. Winter means starving. Every year follows the same exhausting circular path. No vacations, no long weekends, no retirement. Time is measured by crop cycles, animal births, and saints' feast days. The arrival of winter brings dread, as stored food dwindles and sickness spreads like a biblical punishment. You live at the mercy of the weather. Too much rain, your crops rot. Too little rain, your crops die. A single bad harvest can mean hunger for months. Several bad harvests. Famine? And famine doesn't kill quickly. It starves you over weeks, hollowing out your body while infections nibble away at your weakened flesh. You don't own a clock. No one does. The sun is your master. You rise when it rises. You collapse when it falls. Church bells mark the hours for prayer and labour, but otherwise time is a fluid, oppressive weight pressing down on your shoulders every day. Your life expectancy? Don't get too attached to any long-term plans. If you survive infancy, which is no small feat, your odds of reaching adulthood improve slightly, but death lurks everywhere. By your 20s, you've buried siblings, friends, possibly your first wife during childbirth. Illnesses sweep through villages like invisible armies. Fevers, poxes, infections, dysentery. Each one is a roll of the dice. There are no doctors here. The village healer might offer some herbs or leeches, but prayer is your main medicine. Injury is equally lethal. Break your leg? You're done. Infection will likely follow. Get kicked by a cow? Internal bleeding. Step on a sharp rock? Blood poisoning? There are no antibiotics, no hospitals, no surgeries that aren't butchered by candlelight in a shed that smells like damp hay and failure. Your body deteriorates rapidly. By your 40s, if you live that long, your joints creak like poorly oiled hinges. Your back curves from years bent over the fields. Your eyesight fades. Your teeth are mostly gone. You're referred to as the old one, even though modern people would still be paying off student loans at your age. And yet, compared to many, you've been lucky. Luck is your most valuable possession. Luck determines whether your children survive the winter. Luck determines whether your lord raises taxes again. Luck decides whether the invading army bypasses your village or burns it to the ground. Luck dictates whether your one cow dies of disease or lives to provide milk for another year. Luck governs every element of your survival because medieval life is not a meritocracy. Hard work doesn't guarantee success. Intelligence doesn't ensure safety. Piety doesn't protect against plague. You can do everything right and still be wiped out by one bad storm, one invading army, or one mouse that sneaks into your grain stores. You don't plan for prosperity. You plan for avoidance, avoiding starvation, avoiding punishment, avoiding death. Let's talk about your childhood, or rather your extremely short, highly conditional version of it. The modern concept of childhood, a protected time of learning, play, and self-discovery, doesn't exist here. You're a small adult from the moment you can stand upright without falling over. No toys, no picture books, no play dates. Your first real possession is likely a tiny wooden rake, and your first responsibility arrives shortly after your first steps. By the age of 4 or 5, you're already contributing to the household. Herding chickens, fetching water, picking weeds from the field, scaring birds away from the barley with noisy clappers made of sticks and string. You don't ask why you work, you simply do it, because everyone else is working too. Your parents, your grandparents, your older siblings. If you sit still too long, someone will hand you a task. Idleness is not allowed. Idleness attracts suspicion, and idle hands, as the priest frequently warns you, are the devil's workshop. If you're a boy, you'll likely follow in your father's footsteps, quite literally, out into the fields at dawn. If you're a girl, you'll shadow your mother, learning the delicate balance of back-breaking field work mixed with endless household labour. Cooking, spinning, weaving, cleaning, nursing infants, tending livestock, and pretending you don't notice when lice crawl across your sister's scalp. Your education consists of simple, harsh lessons. Don't step on the goose. Don't drink the water downstream. Don't eat strange berries. Don't talk back to the steward. Don't die. You learn quickly because failure means pain. Cuts and bruises become badges of experience. And the village is full of cautionary tales. Children who wandered too close to the forest and never returned, or who slipped into the well while drawing water, or who succumbed to a fever that took them in a single night. Death is not rare, it is routine. When a child dies, and many do, there's grief, of course, but there's also resignation. It's expected. The priest reminds everyone that the child has gone to God, spared from the brutal adult world that awaited. The community offers quick, quiet condolences, then returns to work. The grain won't harvest itself, and the chickens don't stop laying just because someone's baby didn't wake up. If you survived adolescence, congratulations. You are now officially labour stock. Your most valuable attribute is your body's ability to work long hours without collapsing. You can carry heavier loads. You can plant longer rows. You can haul water from the well without spilling. You can pull weeds faster than your younger siblings. You have become a functional cog in the village's survival machine. No one celebrates this transition. No one marks the occasion with cake or parties. You simply work harder now. The only reward is the continued ability to draw breath. Your identity is not personal, it's collective. You're part of the village, the manor, the parish. You belong to your family, your lord, and your God. Individuality is dangerous. Individuality draws attention. You don't want attention. Attention gets people fined, whipped, or worse. Your behaviour is constantly monitored by neighbours who feel it is their God-given duty to tattle on any hint of impropriety. If you're seen skipping mass, speaking harshly to your parents, or expressing frustration with the steward's endless demands, word spreads quickly. Gossip is the primary form of entertainment here. second only to watching someone else get punished. Your reputation is currency, but it's brittle. Once damaged, it rarely recovers. A single accusation of laziness, theft, or blasphemy can follow your family for generations. And the church is always listening. The church is everywhere. You pray constantly. You pray for rain. You pray for sun. You pray for a good harvest. You pray that your child's fever breaks. You pray that your cow survives the winter. You pray that your Lord forgets you exist during tax season. You pray that the neighbouring baron doesn't decide to invade your village because he's bored or drunk. You don't understand much of the theology. You know the basics. God is good, sin is bad, hell is eternal, and priests are always right. You don't question these rules because questioning is dangerous. Heresy leads to public burnings, and even watching one of those is enough to make you sit up straighter at Mass. Let's talk about hope. You don't hope for prosperity. You don't hope for wealth. You don't even hope for happiness, not in the way modern people understand it. You hope for stability, for a year without bad weather, without disease, without war. You hope to keep what little you have, to see your children survive another winter, to avoid catching the attention of your betters, to die old, which means 40, maybe 50 if you're wildly fortunate. Your ambitions are small because reality demands it. Dreaming too big in the Middle Ages is like trying to fly by jumping off your roof. The landing is never worth the brief moment of hope, yet somehow you still laugh. You still tell stories. You still sing songs at the tavern, even if the ale is watery and the bread tastes like mouldy wood. Weddings are modest but joyful. Harvest festivals offer brief reprieves from suffering. Evenings around the fire provide moments of warmth, both physical and emotional. You hold your spouse's hand, even if it's rough and calloused like yours. You whisper stories to your children as they drift to sleep on beds of straw. You share crude jokes with your neighbours as you repair a fence together. These moments are small, fleeting, and often interrupted by the cruel machinery of your world, but they're real, and they're enough to keep you moving forward. Because at the core of medieval peasant life, beneath the hunger, the labour, the fear, the injustice, there is something both brutal and beautiful. Human stubbornness. You endure, you adapt, you carry on. Because there is no alternative. You're a medieval peasant. And somehow, against all odds, you survive. You open your eyes each morning to a world that is not simply uncomfortable. It is actively hostile. The environment isn't a backdrop here. It's a full-time enemy. The very space you occupy seems designed for your slow undoing. Everything, the weather, the land, the creatures that share your hovel, works tirelessly to ensure your survival remains a question mark every single day. Let's start with your home. Though home might be a strong word, you live in what is generously called a croft, a one-room wooden hut patched together with whatever materials could be stolen from nature or borrowed from rot. The walls are made from wattle and daub, a charming medieval construction technique that involves weaving thin wooden branches together like a cheap basket, then smearing it with a delightful mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, animal dung. Because nothing says architectural stability like layers of excrement acting as insulation. In theory, this mixture dries into a hardened wall capable of standing for years. In practice, it cracks, crumbles, leaks, and slowly erodes every time it rains, which is often. You and your family occasionally fill in the holes with fresh mud when the wind howls too loudly through the gaps. A never-ending maintenance project you didn't sign up for, but can't stop performing. The floor? Dirt? Always dirt? Not smooth, polished dirt. No, that would be too generous. Your floor is uneven, cold, and full of little divots where moisture gathers into miniature puddles. In winter, these freeze into slick ice patches. In summer, they turn into mud pits. Every step you take indoors risks twisting an ankle or slipping face first into your own living space. Furniture is minimal because you can't afford luxuries like comfort. You might have a small wooden table, roughly hewn from the cheapest planks you could scavenge or barter for. A couple of stools, though stool is really just a log someone hacked into something vaguely resembling a seat. If you're wildly fortunate, perhaps one rickety chair with a backrest, passed down from generations as though it was some kind of royal heirloom. Beds, technically. You sleep on what could be called a pallet. Straw stuffed into a cloth sack, if you're lucky enough to have cloth. Otherwise, loose straw layered onto the dirt floor. Over time, the straw compresses and decays, becoming a cosy habitat for lice, fleas, mice, and anything else small enough to crawl into your bedding and large enough to bite you in your sleep. You don't own sheets, you don't own pillows. Your blanket is a single coarse wool sheet that traps moisture like a medieval sponge and gains weight with every passing month as dirt, sweat, and grime accumulate. Washing it is not an option. The closest it gets to clean is when the sun accidentally hits it while you're airing it out. Now let's step outside. The village itself is compact, not because it was designed that way, but because nobody had the resources to spread out. A few dozen hovels, a small wooden church, perhaps a rudimentary mill, and communal fields stretching beyond the clustered homes. Narrow dirt paths connect everything, worn smooth by centuries of trudging feet, wooden carts, and occasional livestock traffic jams. There's no sewage system. Waste goes into communal pits or, more frequently, gets dumped directly onto the streets and fields. Human waste, animal droppings, rotting food scraps, it all merges into an ever-present sludge that cakes your boots and fills your nostrils. In the rainy season, the village becomes a swamp of mud and filth. In winter, that same sludge freezes into jagged, rock-hard ridges that threaten to snap your ankles with every careful step. In summer, the heat bakes the mixture into hardened, cracked crusts that release powerful waves of ammonia as the sun warms the waste. Now let's talk about the wildlife that shares your world, both invited and deeply uninvited. Rats are everywhere, fat, bold, and utterly unafraid of humans. They scurry through your food stores, gnaw through your woven baskets, and occasionally nibble at your sleeping children's exposed toes. Mice are smaller, but equally relentless. You share your grain with them, whether you want to or not. Fleas and lice live on your body permanently. You never fully get rid of them. You simply learn to tolerate the constant itching, scratching yourself raw at night under your damp wool blanket while whispering your evening prayers. Bedbugs hide in your straw bedding, waiting to emerge after dark for their nightly feast on your exposed skin. Their bites swell into angry red whelps that blend nicely with the rashes you've acquired from wearing unwashed wool for months on end. Flies fill your home in the warmer months, drawn by the scent of human sweat, animal dung, and decomposing scraps. They land on your face, your food, your children, and anything else unfortunate enough to be within reach. You learn to swat them away absent-mindedly, like brushing dust off your shoulder. In summer, mosquitoes arrive with reinforcements, their high-pitched buzzing driving you to madness while you attempt to sleep. You can't light candles to keep them away. Wax is expensive, and oil lamps are reserved for church or your lord's manor. Instead, you slap blindly in the darkness, hoping to kill enough of them to steal a few hours of fitful sleep. But while the insects never leave, the weather is the true tyrant of your existence. The weather is not a feature of your world, it is your master. It rules your every decision, your labour, your survival, and ultimately your lifespan. Every year you live is a negotiation with the sky. Spring arrives like a drunken guest. Sometimes late, sometimes early, never trustworthy. The snow melts into sticky, sucking mud that clings to your boots and slows every step like you're wading through half-congealed porridge. The thatched roof of your hovel leaks from all directions as winter's moisture finally seeps through every rotted seam. Your dirt floor becomes a swampy sponge where insects wake from their frozen stupor and return to their full-time jobs of making your life miserable. Spring is planting season, a time when your body breaks itself to feed a future you may not live to see. You plough fields with crude, wooden ploughs dragged by oxen, if you're lucky enough to own one, or by you if you're not. The soil is stubborn, often waterlogged or stubbornly dry, and full of stones that crack your wooden tools and your brittle bones. You hunch for hours, turning earth beneath a low, colourless sky, while cold rain needles your exposed neck. Your hands crack and bleed from gripping rough tools. Your back spasms from constant bending. Your eyes squint against sharp gusts of wind that carry flecks of dirt and manure into your face. But you keep working, because not planting means not eating. Hunger isn't some distant concept. It's standing behind you, breathing down your neck, counting the days until your grain stores run dry. Summer arrives like a blazing hammer. The air grows thick with heat and insects, as if nature decided that suffering is best served sweaty and itchy. You can't simply remove layers to cool off. Scandalous exposure of skin would invite whispers, judgment, and potentially worse. Sunburns that blister and crack open like overripe fruit. Instead, you stew inside your woolen tunic like meat in a boiling pot. The heat transforms your village into a massive compost heap. The smell of human waste, rotting food, animal corpses, and unwashed bodies rises in suffocating waves. Flies arrive by the thousands, covering everything: your food, your face, your livestock, your children's mouths while they sleep. You swat them away in a futile, endless dance that only seems to encourage them further. The fields offer little mercy. The sun bakes the soil into rock. Your feet blister and bleed inside your thin shoes, if you own any, while sweat pours down your spine and soaks your undergarments, which you haven't washed in weeks. Thirst gnaws at you constantly, but the water from the stream is dangerous. You drink weak beer instead, though even that grows sour and warm as the barrels sit in the heat. And then there are the storms. Sudden, violent bursts of rain hammer down without warning. The parched soil, unable to absorb the deluge, turns into rivers of mud that sweep away young crops. Hail sometimes arrives like nature's cruel joke, shredding tender seedlings you just spent weeks planting. Each storm feels personal, as if the sky itself mocks your pathetic attempts to survive. If the heat doesn't kill your crops, fungal blight might. Entire fields can rot overnight, turning green wheat into black, slimy masses unfit for consumption. Watching your harvest die just before it's ready is not unusual. It's expected. Autumn is supposed to be a season of harvest, but don't let the word fool you into imagining abundance. Harvest is a race against time and decay. You gather what little the land has offered, racing storms, animals, and your fellow peasants to get grain into storage before the rot sets in. Your muscles scream from days spent bending, lifting, and carrying heavy sacks of barley or rye. Your hands become shredded from the sickle's constant friction. Your joints throb. Your skin cracks and bleeds. And yet, despite all your labour, your storage bins may barely fill. The harvest is often insufficient. Not enough to last the winter. Not enough to feed every mouth. And what you do store will be subject to rats, mould, and theft, both from desperate neighbours and from the taxmen who arrive with their insatiable demands. The Lord's agents appear like vultures, demanding their cut of the harvest for rents and taxes. The church follows behind, extracting tithes with pious smiles and veiled threats about your soul's eternal fate. By the time everyone above you has taken their share, what remains may feed your family, or it may not. You do not question these things. You simply bow, pay, and pray. Winter, however, is the season that truly tests your will to live. Winter is not a romantic snowscape. It's a slow, drawn-out siege laid by the cold. The fire in your hearth burns low because firewood is scarce, and gathering wood from the Lord's forest is illegal, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or worse. You burn peat, dried dung, or brittle scraps of branches. Anything to create a meagre flame that barely warms your frozen toes. The walls of your hut breathe cold air through every crack. Your children huddle together for warmth beneath your single damp blanket, their breath hanging in the air as ghostly vapour. Your own joints freeze stiff overnight, forcing you to shuffle like an old man each morning, regardless of your age. Frostbite nibbles at your fingers and toes like tiny rats. Skin cracks open, bleeding freely, refusing to heal in the frigid air. If a child falls ill with fever or cough, which they often do, there is little to be done. You have no medicine, only prayers and poultices of questionable value. And hunger, always hunger. Your food stores dwindle rapidly. What little grain remains is stretched thin with bark flour, ground acorns, or dried grass. Turnips become your primary diet because they're hardy, flavourless survivors, the cockroach of medieval vegetables. You chew tough bread that breaks teeth and drink weak beer that barely dulls the gnawing ache in your gut. If a neighbour's cow dies, you watch carefully, wondering if the family will butcher it quietly or risk letting it rot in the cold. Every mouthful of food is precious. Every mealtime is negotiation with starvation. And still, the environment offers more ways to destroy you. The environment doesn't merely make you uncomfortable, it conspires to kill you creatively. When you're not being slowly broken by the seasons, you're being stalked by disease, which thrives in every corner of your world like an invisible wolf pack. You live shoulder to shoulder with filth. The waste pits overflow. Animals drop their leavings in the streets. Flies spread rot from one pile to the next like tiny, cheerful merchants of misery. Every breath you take is seasoned with a sharp tang of ammonia, dung, smoke, sweat, and decay. There is no sanitation, no drainage, no separation between the water you drink and the waste your neighbours dump. Even when water seems clean, it's likely carrying gifts. Dysentery, cholera, or parasites that make your belly swell before they slowly hollow you out. You don't know the words for bacteria or viruses. You simply know that drinking from the stream sometimes makes your insides twist until you die in a puddle of your own sickness. Children drop like flies during outbreaks. Their tiny bodies can't fight off the invisible invaders, and your only response is to pray harder and watch helplessly as they fade away in front of you. The priest arrives to offer last rites. The neighbours lower their voices, and soon another tiny mound appears in the overcrowded churchyard. But disease isn't finished with you. Sometimes entire plagues sweep through, as though death itself decided to take an evening stroll through your village. When plague arrives, it announces itself quickly. Fevers, blackened boils, painful swellings beneath the arms or groin, rapid coughing, bloodied vomit. Your neighbours scream through the night, racked with pain, while priests desperately chant prayers that don't work and burn incense that doesn't help. Bodies pile up faster than the grave diggers can keep up. The smell of decomposing flesh saturates the air, seeping into your clothes, your hair, your very breath. Wolves and wild dogs lurk at the edges of town, drawn by the scent. Crows gather in growing numbers, watching silently from thatched rooftops like patient executioners. Some say it's God's punishment. Others whisper about poisoned wells, foreign merchants, or sinful thoughts infecting the community. Nobody knows the real cause, and it doesn't matter. People die. Entire families vanish. Villages empty out like extinguished candles. The church holds mass funerals. But soon even the priests die. The death bell tolls constantly until even its echo feels like part of the disease. And somehow, by luck, by fate, by sheer dumb stubbornness, some survive. You might survive. And then you do what all survivors do. You bury your dead, clean your hut, and return to the fields because the wheat won't plant itself. Even when plague isn't stalking you, the wild animals are. You are not at the top of any food chain. You're simply too stringy and poor to be worth eating most of the time. Wolves roam the nearby forests. Their howls a constant reminder that nature is never fully tamed. A bad winter drives them closer. You've heard stories of children snatched from the edge of town. You've seen the torn remains of a neighbour's sheep after a midnight raid. Bears lurk in the deep woods, dangerous not because they hunt you, but because you sometimes accidentally stumble into their path while collecting firewood or mushrooms. They leave you alone most of the time. Most of the time. Wild boars are worse. Aggressive, unpredictable, and armed with tusks sharp enough to open your belly like an overripe gourd. Hunting them is an act of bravery, stupidity, or desperation, usually all three. Foxes slip into hen houses under cover of darkness, stealing precious eggs or entire chickens. Hawks and eagles carry off small animals, and occasionally unattended infants if stories are to be believed. Every creature around you is another competitor for your scarce resources. Even your livestock and your livelihood can turn on you. An angry bull or frightened horse can kill you with a single panicked kick. A pig can crush a child beneath its weight. Cows trample careless farmers. Goats butt children into wells. But even animals pale in comparison to your greatest predator, hunger. Hunger is not an event. It is a permanent companion. A constant ache behind every task. A whisper in your ear as you work the fields. An invisible weight hanging over every meal. The harvest never yields enough. Even in good years, you stretch thin rations across long winters, mixing bark flour into bread to make it last. When stores run low, you ration, first half portions, then quarter portions. Children eat first, the elderly eat last. You skip meals and pretend you aren't hungry, while your stomach clenches into itself like a writhing fist. In lean years, and there are many, famine arrives. The fields yield nothing but weeds and dust. The animals grow thin, then die. Neighbours whisper of missing pets. You chew boiled leather straps, softened over fires, or gnaw on tree bark like desperate deer. Stories circulate about eating grass, roots, or, in the darkest times, human flesh. No one speaks of cannibalism openly, but the rumours swirl like flies over the dead. Mothers bury infants quickly, not only from grief, but to protect the bodies from neighbours driven mad by starvation. Skeletons turn up in fields with bones broken, cracked open for marrow. It's not common, but it's not unheard of. And you know, deep down, that you might do the same if your children's lives depended on it. The psychological weight of hunger shapes every decision you make. You never waste food. Every scrap is saved, boiled, or fed to animals. Even spoiled grain may be eaten, despite the risk of ergot poisoning. You've seen neighbours fall into seizures after eating tainted rye, their bodies writhing as though possessed by demons, their minds slipping into terrifying hallucinations. You pray for rain when the sun bakes your fields. You pray for sun when the rains turn your fields to swamps. You pray constantly because you control nothing. Your Lord won't save you. The church will tell you to pray harder. The merchants will sell you grain at prices you cannot afford. And so you dig deeper into yourself, carrying your hunger like an unwanted child clinging to your back. And through all of this you continue, because to stop is to die. But the environment has still more gifts. For when nature and hunger leave you standing, there is always fire. If the starvation, the vermin, and the disease haven't finished you yet, rest assured. Fire is patiently waiting for its turn. Fire in the medieval village isn't merely a tool. It's a dangerous gamble you light every single day. Your entire life revolves around an open flame, inside a wooden box filled with flammable materials. The hearth in your one-room hovel burns constantly when you can afford the fuel. You need it to cook what passes for food, to keep frostbite at bay, and to stop your children from freezing into little human icicles by dawn. But one spark, just one tiny ember floating up to the thatch roof, and your entire home becomes a bonfire. Your roof is dry straw. Your walls are dry wood and dried dung. Your floor is dirt, but it won't stop the flames. If your house catches fire, it doesn't burn slowly. It erupts. The smoke suffocates long before the heat reaches you. And once your house goes up, so does your neighbour's. And his neighbour's. And then the village is ash. There are no fire brigades. There's no emergency bell to call professional responders. Your only hope is for enough terrified villagers to form a bucket line from the filthy stream, desperately tossing dirty water onto a blaze that's spreading faster than your collective panic can contain. Many medieval villages burned down multiple times over the course of decades. Entire communities vanished in a single windy afternoon, their populations forced to rebuild everything from scratch with bleeding hands and salvaged nails. And yet, every day, you light that same flame again. Because freezing is worse. And then, of course, there's wind. The wind doesn't seem dangerous until you live under a roof made of sticks and mud, held together by nothing but hope and bad twine. A storm can rip your roof straight into the sky, like an angry god swatting away your meagre defences. You and your family clutch each other as rain pours through the empty space where your ceiling used to be, knowing full well you have neither the resources nor the time to repair it before the next storm arrives. Even on calm days, the wind finds ways to torment you, blowing dirt into your eyes as you plant seeds, carrying foul odours from the waste pits into your dinner, spreading smoke into your lungs as you crouch over a struggling fire. The wind never rests. It sneaks into your clothing, stealing whatever pitiful warmth you've trapped against your skin. And above all this, hanging permanently over your existence, is the forest. The forest isn't just a collection of trees, it's a presence. Dark, unknowable, and full of threats both real and imagined. The Lord controls access to the forest. You may not enter to gather firewood, to hunt, or to trap animals without permission. Poaching, even for survival, carries brutal penalties, fines, imprisonment, even death. The animals inside belong to the Lord. The trees belong to the Lord. The mushrooms, the berries, the fallen branches. All his. But desperation doesn't always care about rules. Many peasants sneak into the edges of the forest under moonlight, hoping to gather enough fallen branches to survive another cold night. If caught, you face the steward's wrath. If not caught, you risk running into something worse. Wolves, wild boars, or things less tangible but equally terrifying. The forest is filled with superstition. Witches, spirits, demons. Everyone knows someone who vanished into the trees and never returned. The woods breathe with strange noises, snapping branches, distant growls, phantom voices carried on the wind. You don't go deep into the forest. You don't question the stories. You simply fear it like everyone else. At night, you hear its whispers beyond your hovel's fragile walls, as though nature itself is reminding you that you live here on borrowed time. But not every threat comes from nature. Sometimes the environment welcomes uninvited human visitors. Bandits roam the countryside, especially in the lean seasons. Hungry, desperate men who have nothing left to lose and everything to steal. You have nothing of value, but nothing is still more than they have. A sack of barley, a scrawny chicken. Even your family's only cow might be worth killing for. There are no police, no patrols. The Lord's soldiers protect his castle, not your hovel. If bandits come, you hide. You pray. You hope your door holds. Though, truthfully, a strong kick could bring your entire house down. And then there are the armies. When war rolls across the land, and it always does, because some noble somewhere always wants more land, more titles, or simply got insulted at the wrong feast. You are the scenery caught between swords. Soldiers march through your village, strip your food stores, butcher your livestock, and press your sons into service. They burn fields to deny resources to their enemies, which includes you. Your home is trampled into the mud by heavy boots and stolen horses. The roads clog with refugees from neighbouring villages who tell the same story. Everything lost, everyone scattered. You're not a soldier. You're not a participant. You're merely collateral. You exist to suffer quietly and be replaced by the next generation of peasants who will repeat the cycle. But perhaps nothing better illustrates your environment than the night itself. Nightfall is not peaceful in medieval Europe. It is the moment when your world shrinks to the dim flicker of your hearth. Beyond your door lies only blackness, full of unseen dangers. There are no streetlights, no torches lining the paths. The moon offers brief, pale glimpses, but most nights it hides behind clouds, leaving your village swallowed in darkness so complete you can't see your own hand in front of your face. The sounds grow louder in the absence of sight. The howls of distant wolves, the screech of an owl overhead, the creaking of your own house as wind rattles its fragile skeleton, the murmurs of your children coughing quietly in their sleep, the wet scurrying of rats along your floorboards, and sometimes faint voices. Was that your neighbour? Or something else? You pull the blanket tighter, not for warmth, but for comfort. The environment, in its totality, is not neutral. It is a constant, unfeeling machine that extracts everything from you: your labour, your health, your youth, your family, and offers in return the simple privilege of existing another day. And yet you endure. Because in medieval Europe, survival isn't a reward. It's simply the absence of failure. If you thought the environment was cruel, wait until you meet your job description. Because as a medieval peasant, your primary occupation isn't farming, it's suffering. Farming is simply the activity that happens while you're suffering. You wake before dawn, not because you're some kind of highly motivated early riser, but because the sun is your clock, and if you don't keep pace with it, hunger will. The rooster doesn't gently awaken you. It screams you into consciousness, its shrill cry echoing off the frost-covered mud as your stiff body groans in protest. You sit up from your pile of infested straw, brush off the bugs that have spent the night feasting on your skin, and immediately feel the familiar ache in your spine. You are young, chronologically, but your joints disagree. Years of bending, lifting, digging, and carrying have twisted your back into something resembling a question mark. You haven't stood up straight since you were 8. There is no morning routine, no coffee, no shower, no clean clothing. You pull your same coarse wool tunic over your grime-coated skin, scratch at the fresh crop of flea bites blooming across your stomach, and shove your feet into boots that barely qualify as footwear. Cracked leather sacks held together by fraying threads and blind optimism. Breakfast is more symbolic than satisfying. A chunk of yesterday's rock-hard bread. A ladle of lukewarm pottage that's been simmering since last week. Its flavour profile now somewhere between sour barn and old sock stew. If you're lucky, you might score a turnip. If you're unlucky, the turnip might already be partially nibbled by a rat. Then it's time for work. And work, in medieval terms, means labour so relentless that even your exhaustion gets tired. You step outside into the damp morning mist. The air smells of manure, wet earth, smoke, and faintly, always faintly, of death. The fields stretch before you like an accusation. They are not lush or generous. They are thin, rocky strips of soil that resent your presence almost as much as your Lord does. You don't own these fields. The Lord does. You work them on his behalf because that's the arrangement. One that's been in place so long that no one remembers who first thought it was a good idea. The first task of the day is usually ploughing. The plough is made of wood, crudely reinforced with iron if you're lucky, and attached to a pair of oxen who hate you, hate each other, and hate ploughing. You struggle to keep them moving in a straight line, while the plough jerks and bucks like an angry mule, ripping uneven furrows into the stubborn earth. If you don't have oxen, congratulations. You're the ox. You and your neighbours tie ropes around your waists and pull the plough yourselves, your bare feet sinking into the cold muck as the blade slices through roots and stones that jar your spine with every step. Sowing follows ploughing. You carry a sack of seeds slung over your shoulder, scattering them by hand across the furrows you just carved. There's no precision here, just an exhausted, half-blind estimation of spacing as you stagger forward. Birds swoop down behind you, stealing seeds the moment they hit the soil. You shout and wave your arms, but the crows are fearless, well-fed veterans of this endless cycle. You know full well that only a fraction of these seeds will survive. Some will drown in spring floods. Some will dry up in summer droughts. Some will be eaten by insects, birds, or rodents. And even if the crop grows, a portion will go straight to your lord, your church, and your village miller. What's left, if anything, feeds your family. As the months progress, your labour shifts into maintenance. Weeding. Always weeding. You crawl on hands and knees through endless rows of stunted plants, ripping out weeds with numb fingers while insects swarm your face. Your back cramps. Your knees throb. Your wrists ache from hours of repetitive motion. You build fences from rotting branches to keep animals out, and repair them constantly because animals are better problem solvers than you are carpenters. You dig irrigation ditches with a wooden spade, moving endless piles of dirt that erode away again at the first heavy rain. You carry water in wooden buckets from distant wells, sloshing half of it onto the ground before you reach your destination. Then comes harvesting, which is its own brand of torment. Harvesting is not a celebration of abundance. It's a grim, frantic race against failure. The crops are ready, which means they're also seconds away from being ruined by bad weather, rot, hungry animals, or the unpredictable tantrums of your Lord's steward. You and your neighbours descend on the fields like desperate scavengers, backs bent, arms swinging sickles in long mechanical arcs that carve through stalk after stalk of barley, rye, or whatever meagre crop your soil managed to cough up this year. The sickle is not ergonomic. It is a sharpened crescent of crude iron attached to a wooden handle that blisters your hands with every swing. Your palms are raw within the first hour. By the second, they're bleeding. You keep working anyway, because bleeding hands are still better than empty bellies. The sun beats down as you work. Sweat soaks your tunic until it clings like wet burlap to your skin. Your shoulders burn, your neck stiffens. Your back feels like it's being slowly crushed by an invisible weight that grows heavier with every hour. There are no breaks, no water coolers, no shaded benches. If you stop, you fall behind. If you fall behind, you starve. The grain you cut must be bundled into sheaves and stacked into shocks. Tall conical piles left to dry beneath a sky that looks increasingly unstable as summer fades into autumn. Rain is your constant fear. A single storm can flatten entire fields, transforming ripe grain into rotting sludge that no miller will touch. At night, you stare at the clouds, praying that the wind stays calm and the rain stays distant. Your dreams are filled with visions of blackened fields, hungry rats, and empty storage bins. Once the grain is dry, it must be threshed, beaten with wooden flails, to separate the kernels from the stalks. The work is monotonous, loud, and exhausting. You swing the flail for hours, breathing in clouds of dust and chaff that coat your throat with gritty filth. Your arms ache, your shoulders scream, your legs wobble. The separated grain must then be winnowed, tossed into the air to let the wind carry away the lighter husks. If the wind is too strong, you lose precious kernels. If it's too weak, you have to repeat the process again and again. Every lost kernel is another meal you won't eat come winter. And even after all that, your work is not done. The grain must be stored carefully in wooden bins or clay jars, where rats and mould begin their own quiet harvest inside your home. But grain isn't the only thing you're harvesting. You also tend to your animals, because they are both your livelihood and another set of daily chores that refuse to end. If you're fortunate, you have a cow, a half-starved, stubborn creature that provides thin, bitter milk you can barely keep from spoiling before it turns into a kind of curdled proto-cheese. The cow needs feeding, watering, and constant supervision to keep it from wandering into forbidden pastures where your lord's men will confiscate it. You might have a handful of chickens, each one a nervous, feathered bundle of clucks and panicked flapping. Their eggs are precious when they lay them, but the chickens themselves are vulnerable to foxes, hawks, and hungry neighbours. Pigs are useful because they'll eat almost anything, scraps, waste, even carrion. But raising one is a balancing act between feeding it enough to fatten up and keeping it alive long enough to be worth butchering. Many peasants slaughter pigs just before winter, salting or smoking the meat to survive the lean months. And when that meat runs out, you pray you still have a few turnips left. Goats are your backup plan, smaller, hardier, and far better at surviving the same miserable conditions you endure. They produce a thin, sour milk that can be turned into even sourer cheese. But goats are escape artists. You'll spend countless hours chasing them through fields, yelling curses that your priest would disapprove of. Of course, none of these animals belong entirely to you. You owe portions of their yield, milk, eggs, offspring, to your lord. You may also owe labour services, known as corvée, requiring you to spend extra days working your lord's personal lands, repairing his fences, or building his manor roads. The lord's demands are constant and flexible. When he needs more, you give more. Refusal is not an option. And then there's your wife's labour, brutal, endless, and completely invisible in the eyes of everyone who benefits from it. While you break your back in the fields, she wakes before you do, stoking the dying embers of last night's fire, boiling water hauled in heavy buckets, baking hard bread in a smoky clay oven that cracks and smokes. She spins wool into coarse thread, weaves it into barely tolerable fabric, sews and patches the family's threadbare clothes. She cares for the children, scrubbing their faces, picking lice from their hair, and holding their tiny bodies when they grow feverish from the latest sickness. She feeds the animals. She gathers firewood. She milks the goats. She scrubs the crude wooden bowls you eat from with sand and ashes because there's no soap. She tends a small kitchen garden. Onions, leeks, maybe a few herbs. Anything to stretch the limited stew that bubbles forever in the corner. She gives birth to children in the same house where they'll later sleep, often alone except for the village midwife and a few concerned neighbours. Pain relief, non-existent. Sterile conditions, laughable. If she survives the birth, her reward is to rise the next morning and return to her chores. Her life is labour, wrapped in exhaustion, seasoned with quiet suffering. And through all of this, your children work beside you. They begin hauling water, chasing livestock, and pulling weeds before they have lost all their baby teeth. By 10, they're miniature adults, planting, carrying, herding, patching fences. Schooling is a fantasy reserved for noble sons and occasional priests. Your children learn from your hands, your voice, your mistakes. They labour because you labour. They suffer because you suffer. The youngest sometimes don't survive long enough to reach that stage. A sudden fever, a cough, a stomach ailment, all potentially lethal in a world without medicine. You bury them quickly and silently beneath thin mounds of earth, mark the grave with a wooden cross, and return to work. The living still need food, and so the daily struggle continues, an unbroken loop of labour that neither rewards nor forgives. Labour doesn't respect days, seasons, or your breaking point. It simply continues, as constant as the hunger in your belly. When you collapse into bed each evening, if you can call a lump of straw and lice-infested wool a bed, you know the morning will demand the same from you again. And again, and again. The seasons may shift, the tasks may change, but the work never stops. When you're not planting, weeding, harvesting, or chasing livestock, you're performing endless maintenance, because your world is constantly falling apart. The wooden fence posts rot under constant rain and damp. The thatch on your roof slides loose in the wind, leaving gaping holes for water to pour through. The mud walls of your house crack as seasons expand and contract the earth, opening ragged gaps that let in the freezing winds or crawling vermin. You patch, you reinforce. You stuff straw into holes, hammer crude pegs into leaning beams, tie sagging sections with fraying rope. You balance logs and planks that don't quite fit together, and pray they'll hold through the next storm. You have no carpentry skills. You simply do what your father did. Patchwork fixes taught by desperation. Even your tools are a source of endless frustration. The wooden handles of your hoes, spades and sickles split, splinter and snap under constant strain. The iron heads rust and dull from exposure and use. Sharpening them requires access to a grindstone, if your village even has one, and the iron itself must often be repaired by the village blacksmith, who demands payment you often can't afford. You improvise repairs with strips of leather, spare cord, or rawhide bindings that hold just long enough to fail at the worst possible moment. Every snapped handle costs time you don't have. Every blunted blade makes your labour harder. Every missing tool is one more crack in the delicate structure of your family's survival. Then there's the collective labour, the duties no one escapes. Because you don't merely work for yourself, you also owe labour to your Lord, who sees your body not as a person, but as one more productive unit in his estate's balance sheet. This is known as corvée labour, and it's mandatory. Several days every week, you abandon your own fields to labour on the Lord's personal lands. You plant his crops, harvest his grain, repair his roads, dig his ditches, haul his timber. If his manor needs a new roof, you climb dangerous ladders to patch his thatch, while your own home leaks onto your children. Your Lord's livestock need feeding. His hedgerows need trimming. His storage barns need reinforcement. And when winter comes, you help gather and split his firewood, while your own hearth flickers pathetically on scraps of peat and dung. You receive nothing for this labour. No payment, no reward. Only the privilege of not being fined, flogged, or imprisoned. But even the Lord's labour isn't enough. There's the church too. You owe the priest not only tithes, that cursed 10% of everything you grow, raise, or trade, but also your labour. Church repairs are your responsibility. You help re-thatch the roof, rebuild the wooden belfry, reinforce sagging walls. You carry stones to repair the crumbling cemetery boundary. You dig graves when plague or famine swells the churchyard faster than it can be filled. And you do it all while kneeling at Mass on sore knees, listening to sermons reminding you that your suffering is God's plan, and questioning it risks your soul. And if that weren't enough, the village requires communal labour, because everything here exists on the edge of collapse. The narrow dirt paths that connect homes to fields erode constantly. Heavy rains carve deep channels into the earth, making every journey a twisted obstacle course. You and your neighbours haul stones and logs to reinforce the ruts, pack clay into the holes, and dig trenches to divert floodwaters. The village well, your lifeline, requires maintenance. The wooden frame sags under the strain of constant use. The rope frays, the bucket cracks. If the well collapses or becomes contaminated, you face immediate disaster. No clean water means disease will come faster than prayer can stop it. The mill needs attention. The Lord's miller operates it, but when storms damage the wheel or the river shift its course, the villagers must repair it. You haul stones. You cut trees. You drag logs to redirect the stream. The bridge, if your village has one, is little more than crude wooden planks lashed together. When floods sweep it away, you rebuild it. Not because you love crossing it, but because merchants, tax collectors, and your lord's men demand access. And through all of this, the threat of injury is constant and often fatal. There is no safety equipment, no helmets, no gloves, no proper footwear. A single slip of the sickle can slice open your hand, leaving you vulnerable to infection. One misplaced step on unstable scaffolding can send you plummeting into broken ribs and shattered bones. Injuries that mean death, either from sepsis or starvation if you can't work. A crushed finger while moving stone. A split shin while chopping firewood. A gouged eye from flying debris. Every task offers new, creative ways for your body to betray you. Even something as simple as carrying heavy loads, sacks of grain, bundles of firewood, baskets of vegetables, slowly twists your spine and ruins your joints. You begin limping in your 20s. Your shoulders hunch. Your fingers gnarl. By middle age, your body creaks and groans like a badly constructed cart. But you keep going because stopping isn't an option. And if you think you can rest on Sunday, think again. Yes, technically, Sunday is the Lord's Day, a mandated day of rest. In theory. In practice, you attend multiple church services, confess your sins, pay penance, and listen to sermons about how your suffering is a test of your faith. After Mass, you return home, but rest rarely follows. There's always something that needs doing: mending torn clothing, repairing broken tools, stirring the endless pot of pottage, collecting firewood, tending to the sick. Even on God's day, the labour never fully stops. Just in case the endless, back-breaking grind wasn't enough to occupy your waking hours, there's always seasonal labour. Because nature's cruelty comes in cycles, and you're contractually obligated to keep up. In spring, you contend with floods. Snowmelt and rain turn your fields into shallow lakes. Drainage ditches must be dug or repaired. Long, muddy trenches that demand you sink knee-deep into freezing slop for hours while you scoop waterlogged clay with wooden shovels that bend under the weight. The water brings worms, biting insects, and every manner of bacteria into your home and body. You itch constantly. Your skin splits from the damp and cold. Your boots, if you even have them, rot apart beneath your feet. filling your shoes with cold, stinking water until your toes turn purple and numb. You patch your hut against the rain using reeds and fresh thatch, working atop fragile ladders that creak and sway with every gust of wind. One slip can end in shattered bones and a month of helpless agony, if you survive at all. In summer, you become a slave to the weeds. The sun bakes the earth, but weeds thrive regardless of drought or heat. You crawl through your fields, pulling them by hand for hours on end. Every weed you miss threatens to choke your crops and doom your harvest. The sun scorches your back, turning your skin into leathery strips of burned flesh. There's no sunscreen, no shade, just endless exposure under a sky that seems to pulse with heat. You sweat until your tunic clings like a damp rag. You lose weight even as you eat your meagre meals, your body slowly cannibalizing its own reserves just to keep up with the exertion. By evening, you stagger home dizzy and weak. Your arms ache, your hands cramp into permanent claws. You collapse into the straw, knowing tomorrow offers no reprieve. In autumn, you race against rot. The grain must be cut and stacked before rain ruins it. The vegetables must be dug before frost kills them. The fruit must be gathered before animals devour it. You work from dawn to dusk, muscles screaming, hands bleeding, praying the sky stays dry. There's no room for error. A week of bad weather can destroy an entire year's worth of work. Every cloud brings dread. Every gust of wind sends chills through your gut. The harvest is not a joyful celebration. It's a desperate sprint to outrun starvation. In winter, the labour changes but never stops. The fields lie dormant, but everything else demands attention. You chop firewood with dull, back-breaking axes. You gather kindling from frozen, forbidden forests, always looking over your shoulder for your lord's men. You mend fences battered by storms. You repair leaking roofs with numb fingers while icy winds slice through your clothes like knives. Your face cracks from the cold. Your lips split and bleed. Your breath rises like steam while your body trembles with fatigue. Inside, you maintain the fire, stir the endless stew of turnips and mystery scraps, patch torn clothing, care for sick family members, and watch your food stores dwindle. Hunger gnaws at you more fiercely in winter than at any other time. You wake in the night to your children's coughing, to your wife shivering beside you, to your stomach twisting itself into knots of emptiness. And you wonder every morning if today will be the day the food runs out. And that's when the emergency labour arrives. A storm knocks down part of your lord's manor fence. You're summoned. It doesn't matter that your own fence collapsed last week. His comes first. A bridge collapses. You're sent with crude tools to balance planks over rushing water, risking your life to restore the nobleman's supply lines. A neighbouring village floods. You help evacuate survivors, carry their meagre possessions, and repair washed-out roads. A wildfire ignites. You form a line with buckets of filthy water, passing them from trembling hand to trembling hand as smoke chokes your lungs and flames dance along the treetops. When disaster strikes, your lord commands, and you obey. Always. And as if physical labour weren't enough, you also endure the endless grind of psychological labour, the silent burdens no one sees, but that crush you all the same. You labour under the constant weight of fear. Fear of famine, fear of plague, fear of violence, fear of your lord's anger, fear of the priest's disapproval, fear of wolves, fear of bandits, fear of God himself. Every cough from your child strikes fear into your chest. Every dark cloud on the horizon tightens your stomach. Every missing chicken sparks terror that it was stolen, and that your neighbours might accuse you instead. You live under suspicion, where rumours spread like wildfire. Did you see how little grain they tithed this year? I heard their cow hasn't given milk in weeks. Bad omen. Their daughter hasn't attended Mass. Scandalous. The priest watches. The steward listens. Your neighbours whisper. The tiniest misstep might lead to fines, punishment, or worse, charges of heresy, witchcraft, or theft. You labour under the pressure to stay invisible, to survive not just physically, but politically, spiritually, socially. And when your body finally gives out, as all bodies do, there's no retirement, no pension, no dignity in decline. You work until your legs collapse beneath you, until your lungs rattle in your chest, until your bones snap from brittle weakness. Your reward is not comfort. It is simply that your children take your place. They pick up your tools. They pull your weeds. They dig your graves. And the labour continues. Because in medieval Europe, labour is not a phase of life. It is life. It is everything. If you thought hunger, disease, and backbreaking labour were your greatest burdens, you're mistaken. Your greatest burden is the people above you. Because in medieval Europe, your place isn't simply low, it's designed to be low. You are part of a rigid, unmovable hierarchy, a ladder you are born beneath, chained to its bottom rung, while those above you climb with their boots planted firmly on your face. You're not merely poor, you're positioned. At the top of this towering structure sits the king. You'll never meet him, you'll never see him. In fact, you might not even be entirely sure he's real. His name is spoken at church. His face may appear on the occasional coin that passes through a merchant's pouch far from your village. But for you, the king exists as a distant concept. Like dragons or mercy. Technically, he rules everything. In practice, his power filters downward through an intricate network of noblemen, each one slicing away pieces of authority like carving up a roast. And you are the bony scrap left at the end of the knife. Directly above you stand your lord, the landowner who controls your village, your fields, and your existence. He owns everything: the soil you till, the animals you raise, the roads you walk, the forests you fear, the streams you drink from. His permission governs every act of your life. Want to marry? Ask your lord. Want to hunt for meat? Ask your lord. Want to gather firewood? Ask your lord. Want to move to another village? Ask your lord, and probably pay him for the privilege of leaving. And by ask, what we really mean is beg and pay. The Lord lives apart from you, physically, socially, spiritually. His manor house rises like a stone monument to everything you'll never have. Thick walls, wooden beams, glass windows, yes, glass, a tiled roof that doesn't leak every time it rains. Inside, servants tend his needs. His floors are covered with rushes or even rugs. He dines on meat regularly. He wears linen undergarments, silk tunics, fur-lined cloaks. His boots don't leak. His hands don't blister. His skin isn't cracked from years of cold winds and rough ploughs. While you wake at dawn, he wakes at leisure. While you bow and scrape, he reclines and commands. You rarely see him directly. Most dealings are handled by his steward, who serves as both accountant and enforcer. The steward is not your friend. His job is to extract from you everything you owe and ensure you stay too afraid or too poor to ever consider resistance. When he visits your hovel, and he does, It's not for casual conversation. Your obligations to your Lord are endless. You pay rent, a portion of your harvest. If your crops fail, you still owe it. You pay labour service, the corvée that forces you to abandon your fields to work his. You pay fees for using his mill, his oven, his winepress, his pasture. You pay fines for cutting wood without permission, for missing mass, for minor disputes with neighbours, for having too many pigs, for having too few pigs, for things you don't fully understand. And above all, you owe him your loyalty. Not the kind of loyalty earned through kindness, but the loyalty of a man standing beneath a sword, promising to stand very, very still. Above your lord may sit higher lords, or dukes, or counts, or other titled men whose names you may hear, but whose faces you will never see. They are engaged in an endless game of power and marriage alliances, arguing over lands you will never visit and debts you will indirectly pay. Their battles spill into your world as taxes, conscription, or the occasional passing army that treats your village like a pantry and a latrine on their way to war. And then, above even the nobility, there is the church. Hovering like a second sun over your entire world is the church, and its light is blinding. In theory, the church offers you salvation. In practice, it offers you rules. Endless, invasive, suffocating rules. The priest in your village holds an authority second only to your Lord, and sometimes greater. He speaks for God. You, on the other hand, barely speak for yourself. You don't understand Latin, the language of the Bible, of sermons, of law. You know a few scattered phrases from Mass, words you've memorized by sound, not meaning. The priest tells you what Scripture says, and you believe him because to do otherwise is heresy, and heresy burns. The priest watches you, always. Did you confess your sins this week? Did you attend every Mass? Did you tithe correctly? Did you fast properly? Did you pray the correct prayers? Did you avoid unclean thoughts, actions, or neighbours? Every failure, every slip is recorded. You live in constant anxiety, not only of God's wrath, but of the priest's disapproval, which can lead to excommunication, public penance, or accusations that can end very, very badly. And your tithes, the 10% tax owed to the church, are non-negotiable. You give 10% of your grain, your eggs, your livestock, your income, even if that means your family eats nothing but turnips for the entire winter. Refusing to tithe isn't just an economic problem, it's a spiritual crime. Your Lord may fine you. The priest may damn you. And if the church declares you cursed, your neighbours will avoid you like leprosy. Fear of damnation spreads faster than actual plague. You become an outcast in a village where isolation can kill faster than disease. Holy days fill your calendar, but don't let the word holiday fool you. There are no vacations. On feast days, you go to Mass. On fast days, you starve a little extra. On saints' days, you attend extra services. Every major event in your life, birth, marriage, death, must pass through the church. Every rite comes with its own fee. Baptism requires offerings. Marriage requires blessings and payments. Burial requires prayers and more payments. If you die without paying what you owe, your family inherits the debt. The priest is also the final arbiter of guilt and shame. If your neighbour accuses you of stealing a chicken, if someone claims your goat wandered into forbidden pasture, if rumours circulate that your wife uses herbs to ease childbirth, the priest decides whether you are guilty, and guilt isn't always about evidence. It's about sin, suspicion, and public opinion. Confession is expected. Denial is dangerous. Tears mean nothing. And while the priest rules your village, he too is part of a larger hierarchy. Above him sits the bishop, a man of wealth, power, and political influence. Bishops own land. Bishops command armies. Bishops dine with kings. Bishops build towering cathedrals while your hovel leaks in the rain. Bishops collect tithes not only from you, but from your priest, who squeezes you harder to meet his own obligations. Above the bishop sits the archbishop, and above him, the Pope, God's appointed ruler on earth, whose word is law across kingdoms and continents. You will never see these men. You will never speak their names aloud in casual conversation. Their decisions, made hundreds of miles away, ripple down into your village, like falling stones breaking thin ice, shattering lives beneath each decree. In this world, obedience isn't just expected, it's mandatory. Obedience in the medieval hierarchy isn't simply about survival. It's a constant performance, one you cannot afford to fail. You perform your submission daily. Every boo, every my lord, every father, forgive me, every tithe, every whispered confession is part of the great, grinding theatre that keeps you alive. Your entire body language is regulated. You don't make eye contact with your Lord unless spoken to. You speak softly in the priest's presence. You lower your head when passing any authority figure, because even your posture is a measure of your place in the world. You don't question orders, even when they're irrational. You don't challenge decisions, even when they're unjust. You don't voice complaints, even when they're killing you. Because unlike hunger or disease, which strike indiscriminately, punishment is targeted. Let's talk about punishments, because the medieval hierarchy doesn't merely maintain itself through laws, it maintains itself through fear. Public, personal, visceral fear. Steal grain from your neighbour's storehouse? Lose a hand? Get caught hunting rabbits on your lord's land? Imprisonment, if you're lucky. Flogging if you're not. Fail to pay taxes? The steward confiscates your livestock, or your tools, or your children's future labour. Debts are generational. Speak against the church? You face public penance, standing half naked in the village square while your neighbours throw insults, rotten vegetables or worse. Caught spreading rumours? You may wear the scold's bridle, a metal mask clamped over your head, with an iron plate shoved into your mouth to prevent speech. The mask cuts into your tongue if you attempt to talk, turning conversation into agony. And those are the lighter punishments. For more serious offences, real or imagined, the hierarchy unleashes trial by ordeal. If you're accused of theft, heresy, or witchcraft, and you claim innocence, well, the court needs proof. Trial by hot iron. You carry a searing metal rod for several paces, then your hand is bandaged. After 3 days, they unwrap it. If your wound has healed cleanly, you're innocent. If it hasn't, you're guilty. Trial by water. You're bound and tossed into a river. If you float, you're guilty, clearly supported by Satan's hand. If you sink, you're innocent, and hopefully someone pulls you out before you drown. Trial by combat. Sometimes disputes are settled by violence. You, or a designated champion, fight your accuser. God, theoretically, will ensure the righteous man wins. In practice, the stronger man usually does. These aren't justice systems. They're ritualized cruelty disguised as divine judgment. And who oversees these humiliations? Your betters. The lord and his steward enforce feudal law with brutal flexibility. They decide which crimes are punishable and how severely. The priest supervises moral offences. He determines whether your behaviour offends God and advises your Lord on appropriate punishments. Even your own neighbours enforce the system through gossip and accusations, driven by envy, fear, or desperation. Informing on each other is common, sometimes encouraged. Suspicion spreads faster than any plague. You live in a world where your worst enemy might be your best friend's whisper. And you endure it all in silence, because the alternative is worse. Because humiliation is not an accident of the hierarchy. It's built into its design. The system ensures you feel inferior at every turn. Your clothing marks you. You wear coarse wool, patched and stained. The Lord wears silk and fur. The priest wears fine robes embroidered with gold thread. Even their colours separate you. Bright hues for wealth, dull browns and greys for peasants. Your diet marks you. Your meals are endless variations of barley bread, pottage, and turnips. The Lord feasts on roasted meats, cheeses, honeyed desserts, imported spices, and fresh fruits from distant lands you've never even heard of. Your shelter marks you. You sleep on straw, stuffed with insects, under leaking roofs, while your Lord lies on feather beds, beneath warm woolen blankets, in stone keeps that hold back wind and rain. Even your voice is limited. The language of power, Latin, law, scripture, belongs to your betters. You speak a regional dialect your priest barely respects. Your words are dismissed as ignorance. Your opinions are unwelcome. But perhaps the cruelest humiliation of all is how little you're allowed to imagine anything else. There's no possibility of escape, no ladder to climb, no education to pursue, no opportunities to build wealth, no safety net to catch you. The world is fixed, you're at the bottom, and every person above you stands there to remind you of it daily. The hierarchy isn't just about taxes, labour, or punishment. It invades your entire psychology. You're not merely forced to serve. You are trained to believe that your low position is righteous, natural, and divinely ordained. The priest reminds you every Sunday that God himself has placed you where you are. The noblemen parade their wealth as proof of God's favour. The entire social order is presented as a great cosmic ladder. God sits at the top. Beneath him, the Pope, bishops, and priests. Then the king, then the lords, then the knights, then merchants, then you, the peasant, the serf, the base of the pyramid. The very ground you work beneath your cracked feet reinforces this structure. You don't even own the dirt you dig. You borrow it, temporarily, and one day you'll return to it permanently. The message is clear. You were born for this. You will die for this. And your children will continue this. Even your marriage is controlled by the hierarchy. Marriage is not a romantic pursuit. It is an economic transaction. When you marry, you must pay your lord a merchant fee, essentially compensation for losing one productive labourer from his fields. Even marrying someone from your own village can trigger fees, depending on the customs of your manor. If your daughter marries into another manor, her absence represents lost productivity for your lord, and he charges you accordingly. If you can't pay, he may refuse permission altogether, or demand service instead. Your choice of spouse is limited, not by love, but by survival. Does their family have land? Are they physically strong? Do they have a working ox? Do they owe debts that will become yours? Dowries are rarely coins or gold. They are often a pig, a goat, or sacks of grain. items that can be seized if payments go unpaid. Love is not absent from your world, but it must always bow before economics. If you are female, your humiliation operates on a second, overlapping hierarchy. You are doubly owned, first by your father, then by your husband, both under the ultimate ownership of your lord. You cannot own property independently. Your labour belongs to your husband. Your dowry becomes his. Your children are his responsibility, and often his punishment if debts are unpaid. Childbirth is your most dangerous duty. It may kill you at any moment. Midwives lack medicine, clean instruments, or any real knowledge of infection. Every birth could be your last, and if you survive, you're expected to return to full labour within days. The church controls your body. The priest dictates your moral obligations as wife and mother. You must obey your husband, remain chaste, attend mass, and confess your sins, which include everything from unclean thoughts to questioning your role. If you are widowed, you enter another humiliating layer of existence: vulnerability. Widows may be forced into remarriage by the Lord's will, or lose their late husband's land to his family, or face accusations of witchcraft, because an unmarried woman with no male supervision arouses fear. Your survival depends on appeasing the men around you, whether they are family, clergy, or nobility. Even your children are woven into the humiliation. Their lives are as rigidly dictated as yours. Your sons will inherit your debts before they inherit your land. Your daughters will be bartered as wives or servants if no marriage can be arranged. Some sons may seek refuge in the church, but this is not spiritual ambition. It is often economic necessity. A second son may enter a monastery if your family can find a sponsor, escaping peasant life, but at the cost of permanent celibacy and lifelong obedience to yet another rigid hierarchy. Some daughters may join convents, but most will marry, bear children, and repeat your own endless cycle of backbreaking labour. Even childhood is brief. By 6 or 7, they work alongside you, scaring birds from crops, gathering firewood, fetching water, tending animals. Education is non-existent. Literacy is reserved for priests and nobility. For your children, survival is the only curriculum. And when you look beyond your own family, you see the entire village replicating this structure like a broken wheel endlessly turning. The Lord's steward patrols the village like a predator. The priest stands at the pulpit, reminding you of your inferiority. The miller extracts his fee. The blacksmith mends your tools for a price. The reeve, appointed head peasant, reports your failures to the Lord. Even among your fellow peasants, a micro-hierarchy emerges. Some have slightly larger plots. Some own an extra ox. Some are favoured by the steward. Some gossip louder to win favour with the priest. The tiniest advantages become weapons of petty power. Jealousies fester. Accusations are whispered. Survival becomes a social contest just as much as a physical one. And above all hovers the greatest humiliation of all. You know your suffering is invisible to the people who rule you. When your lord rides past on his steed, he doesn't see your bleeding hands or your hollow cheeks. When the priest collects your tithe, he doesn't see the meal your child won't eat that winter. When taxes are raised, no one notices the bodies disappearing into shallow graves. You are forgotten while you're alive. You are nameless when you're dead. You exist to be extracted. Grain, labour, offspring, obedience, and discarded when you fail. You tell yourself it's God's will. because believing otherwise is too dangerous to contemplate. And so you endure the crushing weight of hierarchy, not because you are weak, but because you have no alternative. The nobility feeds on your work. The church feeds on your soul. The village feeds on your fears. And you feed your children and pray they will live long enough to someday do the same. If hunger, labour, and humiliation are the body of medieval peasant life, then belief is its skeleton, rigid, ever-present, unyielding. You live not just in a physical world, but in an invisible one, a world thick with unseen forces, threats, and punishments that hang over your every breath. A world where God watches constantly, and so do his many agents. Belief isn't something you practice occasionally. It is woven into your reality like the mud in your walls, the straw in your mattress, and the lice in your clothing. It surrounds you, defines you, and polices you. From birth to death, you belong to the church, not metaphorically, but entirely. Your very first act in this world was a baptism, performed quickly, often within hours or days of birth, because an unbaptized child who dies is condemned to limbo, a fate so terrifying that your parents rush to the priest before you can even open your eyes properly. You are baptized into a world where you will never read the Bible. You will never hold one. You will never hear it in a language you understand. Instead, your priest speaks Latin, reciting words as distant to you as birdsong. You trust him to interpret God's will. You must trust him because questioning is dangerous. Mass is your most regular exposure to belief. Each week, you shuffle into the village church, a small wooden or stone structure, damp, dark, and cold. The air smells of incense, mould, and sweat. The narrow windows let in weak light. The wooden benches creak beneath your sore back. You kneel on hard floors while the priest chants unfamiliar words. The Mass is not for your understanding. It is for your obedience. You learn the rhythms by habit. Stand, kneel, cross yourself. Mutter familiar phrases. The priest raises the host, transforming bread into the body of Christ through words you cannot comprehend but dare not doubt. The mystery is part of the control. Your entire calendar is shaped by the liturgical year. Advent prepares you for Christ's coming. Lent strips away indulgence through fasting and penance. Easter offers resurrection. Pentecost celebrates divine fire. Feast days dot your year. Saints' commemorations that mix fasting, feasting, and church services. You fast regularly, sometimes for over 100 days each year, because the church says your suffering purifies your soul. You eat no meat on Fridays. You abstain from pleasures during Lent. You confess your sins, recite prayers, and perform assigned penances. The priest monitors your participation. Fasting isn't just private piety, it's public surveillance. Your neighbours notice if you're seen eating meat on a fast day. They whisper, they report, you confess. Confession is another constant obligation. You kneel before your priest, voice trembling as you confess your sins. Did you miss Mass? Did you argue with your spouse? Did you steal? Did you think impure thoughts? Did you grumble against your Lord? Even your thoughts are policed. Your priest assigns you penance, prayers, fasting, or labour, and you obey, because unconfessed sin threatens your eternal soul, and public penance threatens your place in the village. Heaven dangles above you as an eternal reward, but always feels very far away. Hell looms beneath you as a constant threat, painfully near, vividly described. You've seen the church's wall paintings. devils with pitchforks, demons tearing at naked souls, fire licking at screaming sinners, endless suffering for eternity. The priest reminds you regularly, disobedience brings damnation, pride brings damnation, greed brings damnation, doubt brings damnation. The rules are many, the margin for error is thin, and even beyond heaven and hell there is purgatory, an intermediate place where imperfect souls burn away their remaining sins before entering paradise. Purgatory is no comfort. It is simply more suffering, only slightly better than eternal fire. The Church offers indulgences, purchased prayers that reduce time in purgatory. But indulgences cost money, and you have none. You work and suffer, hoping your family can afford prayers for your soul after you die. You hope, you fear, you obey. But beyond doctrine lies an even thicker web: superstition. The Church may rule your spiritual life, but it does not operate alone. It shares your mind with something far older and more primal, the endless heavy weight of superstition. While the priest preaches of heaven and hell, your neighbours whisper of curses and spirits. Your daily life is wrapped in an invisible net of old fears, half-remembered rituals, and folk magic passed from your grandmother's lips to your mother's hands and finally into your own daily habits. It's not that you believe one instead of the other, you believe both at the same time. They aren't contradictory in your world. They coexist, breathing together like two lungs in your chest. You know that God watches from heaven. You know the saints intercede for your soul. You know the priest speaks for the church. But you also know that witches walk among you. You know that spirits haunt the forests and the crossroads. You know that ill luck can settle over your house like a choking fog if you fail to hang the right herbs or speak the correct charms. The saints protect you, yes, but so does the horseshoe nailed to your doorpost, the garlic braids hanging from your rafters, and the iron nail buried beneath your threshold. Every creak in your hovel at night, every strange moan of the wind through the trees, every shadow moving just beyond the glow of your hearth's embers. These are not simply nature. They are signs, omens, warnings. The world outside your tiny firelight is alive with forces that do not care if you understand them. They only demand your respect and fear. When your child falls ill with a sudden fever, you do not understand bacteria. You see the hand of something darker. Perhaps a neighbour looked at your child with envy. Perhaps a wandering witch cursed your home. Perhaps the devil himself slipped through a crack beneath your door in the night. And so you turn not only to prayer, but to charms, whispered incantations, and poultices of wild herbs gathered beneath specific moons. You know which plants might break a fever. You know which ones might cool down misfortune if gathered at the wrong time. You carry small talismans in your pocket, a knotted string, a carved piece of bone, a dried clove of garlic. Not because the church commands you to, but because your great-grandmother always did. And she survived long enough to see old age, which in your world makes her a kind of oracle. The priest may scoff at these things from his pulpit, but even he knows better than to challenge them too directly. He blesses your fields with holy water, while quietly avoiding mention of the bundle of protective twigs you tucked beneath your doorframe. The villagers bring offerings to the church on feast days, but they also leave small tokens beneath ancient trees rumoured to house restless spirits. No one says these things aloud in mass, but everyone knows them in private. The seasons themselves are thick with rituals meant to keep the balance. At the first planting, you cross yourself before sowing each row, whispering that God protect your crops. But you also toss a few grains into the air for the spirits of the soil. When the harvest comes, you gather the final sheaf carefully, binding it and setting it aside as a token of thanks to whatever forces allowed your crop to grow. You don't name them, but you honour them, because it would be foolish not to. The animals you raise are also watched carefully. A sick cow might mean more than bad feed. It might mean someone's curse has settled on your herd. You know which women in the village are rumoured to carry the evil eye, though you dare not accuse them unless others speak first. You might quietly leave a few extra drops of milk at the crossroads, hoping the gesture pleases whatever unseen thing lingers there. At night, your dreams are not private places. They are warnings, messages, sometimes even threats. A dream of blackbirds circling may herald sickness or death. A dream of clear rivers and green fields might promise safety for another season. You wake in the cold darkness, heart pounding, unsure whether you've been visited by saints or demons, but certain that you must mention it to the village wise woman before night falls again. Weddings are layered with customs, every step designed to fend off bad fortune. The bride wears borrowed tokens. The groom carries hidden charms. Guests toss handfuls of grain or dried herbs, not simply for celebration, but to confuse any spirits who might wish the couple harm. The priest blesses the union, but everyone understands that unseen forces are also in attendance. Childbirth is perhaps the most terrifying intersection of religion and superstition. As your wife groans through labour, you pray fervently to the Virgin Mary and St. Margaret, patroness of childbirth. But you also burn specific herbs, tie protective knots above the beds, and hang small iron charms to ward off evil. The midwife, experienced in both Christian prayer and ancient whisperings, mutters under her breath as she works. If the baby survives, it is baptized immediately, both to ensure salvation and to close the window through which evil might still slip in. And when death finally comes, as it always does, the rituals continue. The priest leads the funeral rites, but the villagers still light candles at the four corners of the corpse to keep wandering spirits from stealing the soul before burial. Coins are sometimes slipped into the hands of the dead, not only as alms for the poor, but as ancient gifts for any guardian who might block the path to heaven. The grave is sprinkled with holy water, but the mourners still avoid speaking the name of the deceased too soon, lest it call their ghost back before they've properly departed. Even your geography is haunted by belief. The crossroads are dangerous places where spirits gather and witches might meet in the moonlight. Old stone circles, remnants of forgotten times, are treated with quiet distance. The woods beyond the village, especially after dark, are not simply home to wolves, but to beings older than your priest's Latin prayers, beings you do not name aloud. The church calendar is thick with feasts, but beneath every Christian festival lies a tangled web of older, half-forgotten customs. Christmas brings celebration, but also carries echoes of ancient midwinter rites that once honoured the rebirth of the sun. Easter proclaims the resurrection, but villagers still weave garlands, decorate eggs, and light bonfires that reach back to pagan fertility rites. The saints themselves, one for every ill and occasion, often replace older spirits rather than erase them entirely. You are not torn between faith and superstition. You carry them both side by side, because in your world they are simply two faces of the same terrifying, unpredictable existence. The priest offers salvation for your soul. The old ways offer a fragile hedge against the daily physical dangers that stalk you and your family. One watches the next life, the other watches this one. And so you obey both. You pay your tithes and your bribes. You confess your sins and whisper your charms. You kneel at Mass and hang charms above your door. You pray to God and leave offerings to the nameless. You live inside this heavy, invisible cage of belief. Not because you are foolish, but because it is the only protection you have against a world where so much remains beyond your understanding and utterly outside your control. The world you live in is not ruled by logic. It is ruled by fear. Fear doesn't only belong to the afterlife. In the world of the medieval peasant, it saturates every moment you live. The things you fear don't sit politely in church sermons or distant futures. They crawl in your fields. They whisper in your ears. They sit at the edge of your village like wolves, waiting for you to stumble. The weather, the crops, the sickness, these are obvious enemies. You see their results every day, but it's the invisible forces that consume your mind long after you blow out your candle at night. The ones you can't see. The ones your priest doesn't always have answers for. The ones that live inside your daily conversations. In the stories your grandparents told you when you were young. And in the quiet warnings exchanged between neighbours. There is always someone to blame when disaster strikes. Sometimes it's your own sin. Sometimes it's the wrath of God. But very often it's someone nearby. Witchcraft is not a fantasy. It is as real to you as your own hunger. You've heard the stories your whole life. Of women who make the cows go dry with a curse. Of old widows who can spoil a harvest simply by staring too long at the fields. Of neighbours who become jealous and call down illness with whispered hexes while the rest of the village sleeps. You do not need to see the magic to know it happened. The sickness, the bad luck, they are evidence enough. No one wants to accuse someone openly. To accuse is dangerous. But to be suspected is worse. And so the whispers float through the village like smoke. No one says anything directly, but everyone knows which woman talks to the crows a little too much, which family's livestock always survives when others starve, whose children recover too quickly from illness. The priest may condemn superstition from the pulpit, but even he glances sideways when he passes the woman who lives on the edge of the village, who knows too many herbs, who has buried too many husbands. And if the village suffers, if the harvest fails, or a plague visits, or livestock dies in strange numbers, the pressure builds, eyes narrow, voices lower, and eventually someone speaks too loudly. An accusation is made, the steward listens, the priest listens, the Lord listens, the woman is almost always a woman, denies, of course, but denial is thin armour against fear and desperation. She may be brought to trial. The village watches. Some hope for her innocence. Many hope for her guilt, because then at least there's a reason for their suffering, something they can point to, something they can burn. If she's found guilty, and most are, she may hang, she may burn, she may simply vanish into a dungeon no one speaks of again. Her death brings a brief calm, a desperate hope that the curse is broken. But the fear never leaves. It only hides until the next bad season. Witchcraft is not your only danger. You fear the dead as much as the living. The boundary between life and death feels thin in your world. You've seen too many fresh graves. You've buried children, siblings, parents, friends. and you know that not all of them rest peacefully. The graveyard is sacred ground, but not always a guarantee. The priest blesses the graves, but you have heard stories of restless souls rising, of spirits returning to haunt the living, of dead who refuse to stay buried because of some unresolved sin or curse. You avoid walking near the graves at night. You avert your eyes from the churchyard when the moon is high. You knock on wood when speaking of the recently departed, to keep them from hearing you speak their names. The church tells you to pray for the souls in purgatory, but your neighbours tell you to keep your doors bolted at night during certain seasons, especially after a sudden death. A wandering spirit might slip inside and bring misfortune, and so you hang protective charms in the rafters. You burn specific herbs on certain feast days. You sprinkle holy water when a sickness lingers too long in your home. You also fear what lives in the land itself, the rivers, the forests, the hills. They are not just places. They are homes to old forces that predate every Latin prayer. The woods especially. Always the woods. During the day, they are dangerous for wolves and bears. But at night, they hold things much older and stranger. The kind of beings you don't name. Travellers speak of shadowy figures glimpsed among the trees, of strange lights that float like will-o'-the-wisps, of voices that call out in familiar tones, only to lead men to their doom. You've heard of entire families that vanished after entering the deeper parts of the forest. No one goes looking for them. You assume they have joined the others, the ones who never returned. Even your fields, which you break your back to plough, are not fully yours. You may till them, but you owe offerings to the old forces of the soil. A few grains thrown before planting. A whispered prayer before the first cut of harvest. Not because the priest says so, but because everyone before you always has. And it would be foolish to anger whatever might be watching beneath the earth. Marriage rituals still carry these old superstitions. It isn't enough to say your vows before God. You must also follow the hidden rules. The bride must carry certain herbs to ward off evil. The guests must make loud noises to scare away jealous spirits. The couple must cross the threshold of their home carefully, ensuring the first step brings fortune, not misfortune. These are not just traditions. They are survival strategies, quietly honoured alongside Christian rites. Pregnancy is watched with the same anxious balance of faith and fear. You pray to the saints, but you also avoid certain places and people during vulnerable months. A careless glance from a bitter neighbour. A fox crossing your path on the wrong morning. A crow's cry at the wrong hour. Any of these might mark the child before it's even born. And so you wear small charms sewn secretly into your clothing. You avoid certain foods. And you mutter protections under your breath when no one is listening. The church may baptize your newborn, but you still hang iron scissors above the cradle to guard against ill-willed spirits. You still watch for signs that the child is thriving, wary of the stories about changelings, those pale, thin infants who never gain weight, who cry strangely, whose eyes seem too old, too knowing. Some whisper that fairies steal healthy children and leave their own twisted offspring in their place. The priest denies such things, but the mothers still watch carefully. Even the way you bury your dead reflects this quiet battle between the old and new. The priest leads the prayers, but some families quietly turn the dead to face specific directions, or bury personal objects in the grave, not for comfort in the afterlife, but to keep the dead content and settled to prevent their return. Every grave is a hope that this person, at least, will stay where they belong. This web of beliefs doesn't feel strange to you. It's not a contradiction to kneel before the priest in the morning and visit the hedge witch at night. It's not odd to attend Mass on Sunday while carrying a pouch of protective herbs in your pocket. This is simply the world you've inherited, where every force, seen or unseen, demands your attention and respect. You don't have science. You don't have explanations. You have fear. And when fear is your only constant companion, you will honour every possible method of survival, no matter how strange, no matter how old. You don't expect certainty. You pray for mercy. You don't live in a world of maybe. You live in a world of constant certainty, where every event is driven by unseen forces, and every misstep is punished by someone. If not by your Lord, then by your priest. If not by your priest, then by God. And if not by God, then by something older, colder, and far less forgiving. And so your beliefs become your armour, a heavy, suffocating armour that you never take off. Belief shields you from dangers you cannot see and cannot escape, but it also presses against you with its own weight. Every decision, every movement, every silence carries a consequence that may not reveal itself for days, months, or generations. You are trapped inside a web where your own breath feels like it might attract the wrong kind of attention from above or below. You walk past your neighbours every day, but you never fully trust them, nor they you. They smile, they nod. They offer bread when your wife gives birth. But beneath the surface, everyone carries quiet suspicions. Did their harvest thrive because they worked harder, or because they whispered something to dark forces beneath the old oak tree? Did your neighbour's healthy cows survive the winter because of luck, or because he bribed something invisible with a secret offering? No one says these things aloud, but everyone feels them. Even the priest watches his flock with a sharp eye. He is not just your shepherd. He is the eyes and ears of your Lord and of the larger church, an extension of an invisible hierarchy that reaches all the way to Rome itself. He hears your confessions. He knows which men drink too much. He knows which women have grown too close to the healer who lives at the edge of the woods. He knows whose tithes have grown suspiciously thin. And when the time comes, when famine returns, or a plague knocks on your door, when a death comes too quickly or too slowly, he may remind the village of certain rumours that have been quietly simmering for years. His sermons are not gentle invitations, they are reminders. He speaks of hell often, but it is not some faraway place for distant sinners. Hell is a very real destination that can open beneath your own village at any time. Your neighbour may already be halfway there. Your own children may follow you there if you fail to discipline them properly. You are taught that your every act contributes to your salvation or your damnation. No small sins are truly small, because any crack may widen into eternal punishment. And so you live your days layered in fear, but also in routine. The repetition brings a strange comfort. You know when to kneel, when to cross yourself, when to fast, when to confess. You know which saints handle which problems. Saint Sebastian for plague, Saint Isidore for crops, Saint Barbara for storms, Saint Anthony for lost animals. When a new problem arises, you simply add another saint to your growing collection of whispered prayers. Every corner of your house holds small reminders. A carved crucifix, a bit of blessed wax, a sliver of holy relic purchased at great cost. But even these holy protections live side by side with the other ones. The iron nail driven discreetly into your doorframe to ward off wandering spirits. The small pouch of dried herbs buried beneath your threshold to protect your family from jealousy. The bits of string tied around your child's wrist when they first fall ill. The priest never sees these things, or at least pretends not to. He allows the two worlds to overlap, because he knows, as everyone does, that without these small rituals, the world would be too terrifying to endure. You cannot survive by prayers alone. You need the hedge witch's poultice. You need the old grandmother's advice whispered in the dark. You need the little charms that hang quietly beneath your clothing, unseen by both God and your neighbours. And if you are accused of heresy, which you may be someday if your luck turns, your crimes won't sound like grand theological debates. You won't be charged with denying Christ or questioning doctrine. You'll be charged for the little things, for speaking to someone you shouldn't have, for knowing a charm you shouldn't know, for whispering a wish into the wind that someone heard, for having too much grain when others starved, for healing a sick animal too quickly, for doing something that suggests you have knowledge no peasant should possess. When the Inquisitor arrives, and he always arrives eventually, you will not recognize him as a monster. He will wear robes, carry crosses, speak in holy language, and remind you that this is for your own salvation. He will offer you a chance to confess before they light the fire. He will assure you that your suffering may yet shorten your time in purgatory. The villagers will watch, some weeping, some whispering, some relieved it isn't them. And then, when the smoke clears and your ashes scatter in the same wind that once carried your whispered charms, the village will return to work. The field will still need ploughing. The church bells will still toll. The priest will still deliver his sermons. The seasons will keep turning. Because the culture you live in isn't merely about belief, it is about endurance. About carrying two worlds at once. About surviving not only the physical world that tries to break your body, but the invisible world that holds your soul hostage. The saints will continue to listen if you are faithful. The old spirits may continue to spare you if you are careful. Your neighbours will continue to watch, whether you succeed or fail. And you will continue to bow your head beneath it all, because to do otherwise is not only dangerous but unthinkable. In the world of the medieval peasant, belief is never optional. It is stitched into every second you breathe, into every bite you eat, into every prayer you murmur in the middle of the night when your children cough, and you don't know if God or something older is listening. And so you endure, you obey, you survive, you believe, because not believing is simply not possible. You wake up every morning knowing that horror is not something distant. It is not an isolated event or a once-in-a-lifetime tragedy. Horror is simply another part of your life, like labour, hunger, and prayer. It lives alongside you, as familiar as your own shadow. In the world of the medieval peasant, horror isn't reserved for extraordinary moments. It lives in the ordinary. You have seen infants die so many times that grief has changed shape. It no longer arrives as screaming or wailing. It arrives as silence, as a mother clutching a breathless child to her chest while her neighbours avert their eyes, knowing too well that no words can help. The child will be buried quickly, not only because the family needs to return to work, but because leaving a small corpse unburied risks both illness and superstition. If you have 3 children, You consider yourself fortunate if one survives to adulthood. You do not expect your children to live long lives. You hope for it, you pray for it, but you do not expect it. And when they die, from fever, from hunger, from infection, you return to the fields the next morning because the barley still needs to be planted. You know neighbours who have buried 5, 6, 7 children. Entire families disappear from the village some years, swallowed by winter, plague, or famine. Their homes sit empty for a time, until another desperate family moves in to try again. Horror lives in the small wounds that kill. A simple cut on your hand while harvesting wheat can turn black with rot, swelling with heat until fever racks your body. There are no doctors here, only the village herbalist, who applies crushed leaves and whispered prayers, hoping the infection does not spread to your blood. Often it does. You grow weak, you sweat, you shake, and then you die. Your neighbours may gather around your body for the last prayers, but there is no mystery in your death. Everyone knows that one day a small wound will claim them too. Even your animals bring horror. A cow that suddenly grows sick may carry disease that spreads to the entire herd. When famine strikes, desperate men steal livestock in the dead of night. You may wake to find your only pig missing, its blood trailing into the woods, its carcass butchered far away from your empty pen. You do not report the theft. You know the thief. He is your neighbour. His children were starving too. You cannot afford to make enemies. You simply bow your head, rebuild the pen, and pray your own children survive the winter that now feels even longer. Horror takes the form of famine, when the harvest fails and the grain bins sit mostly empty by the first frost. When the last of the salted meat runs out, you stretch the bread thinner, mixing in bark, acorn flour, and whatever scraps of wild plants remain. The stew grows more water than food. Your children's bellies swell unnaturally. They grow thinner even as their stomachs distend. They shiver through nights made longer by hunger. They lose the energy to cry. You have seen hunger twist good people into something else. A man who would share his bread 1 month may turn his back the next. Neighbours who once traded eggs now guard their coops with stones in their hands, watching for hungry hands that may steal in desperation. You've heard stories, always whispered, of people eating things no one should eat. Rats, cats, dogs, sometimes even worse. You don't ask for details. You don't want details. The priests speak of charity, but charity dies quickly when the hunger grows. The horror of plague arrives with no warning, like a shadow falling across your village. You have seen the signs before. The first cough, the first child with a strange fever, the purple swellings under the skin. Once it begins, it spreads with merciless speed. A week later, entire families vanish. Their homes are locked shut, marked sometimes by hurried crosses painted on the doors. The village goes quiet except for the coughs and the weeping. The smell of death becomes part of the air itself. Sweet, cloying, heavy. You burn herbs in your home not to cure disease, but to mask its smell. The priest walks from house to house, offering last rites, his face pale with fear, his prayers growing hoarse as each day claims more bodies. Sometimes the priest dies too. The graveyard overflows. You dig shallow graves now, just to keep up with the dead. The plague does not care if you are righteous. It takes the pious and the wicked equally. It is not God's judgment. It is something older, colder, and infinitely crueler. You do not understand it. You do not expect to. If you survive this plague, you know it will return again, and again. Even if you live, the horror leaves scars. The empty homes never reopen. The missing faces never return. The village feels thinner, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. Then, as suddenly as it came, the plague moves on, leaving you to rebuild, to plough the fields again, to pray harder, to bury the memories deeper. And when plague sleeps, war wakes. You do not fight in the wars, not unless your lord demands it. But the wars come to you anyway, as wandering soldiers cross the countryside like locusts. They need food, they need shelter, they need women. Your village becomes a brief stop for men who see you not as people but as resources. They take what they need. They take your grain, your animals, your firewood. They take your daughters and your wives. Sometimes they burn the homes for sport before they leave, laughing while the flames consume everything you have spent years building with your bare hands. You dare not resist. To resist is to invite slaughter. You bow. You offer what little you have. You pray they move on quickly. You pray they do not notice your youngest daughter hiding behind the haystack. You pray they do not return. And when they finally leave, you sweep the ashes aside and begin again. Horror lives even in the laws that govern you. Your lord may increase taxes without reason. The steward may demand more grain than your field can yield. The priest may accuse you of withholding tithes, even when your children are starving. You have no recourse, no appeal. Their word is law, and law is not justice. Law is power. You have seen men whipped for failing to meet impossible demands. You have seen women beaten for stealing handfuls of grain. You have seen children dragged away to labour on distant estates as payment for their father's debts. You have watched your neighbours fall apart under burdens too heavy to bear, collapsing not from violence, but from the slow crush of demands that grind them into silence and obedience. Even justice itself becomes absurd. You know that guilt and innocence are decided not by truth, but by spectacle. Trials by ordeal, carrying hot iron, plunging your arm into boiling water, floating in cursed rivers. These are your village's definition of proof. If you heal quickly, God has spared you. If not, you are condemned. You've watched neighbours burn for crimes they never committed and survive punishments they clearly deserved. There is no consistency, no fairness, only the appearance of divine will. And everyone nods along, because nodding is safer than questioning. The absurdity of this world wraps around you so tightly that you stop noticing it after a while. You stop questioning why the miller can steal grain openly while a man who steals bread is flogged. You stop asking why your lord dines on venison while your child chews on bark. You stop asking why God allows these things, because the priest will answer you, and you won't like his answer. You're not permitted outrage, you're permitted only endurance. This is the horror of your world. Not sudden tragedy, but the slow, endless parade of suffering that repeats itself, generation after generation, until you begin to believe that this is simply how life is meant to be. That perhaps this is how God designed it. That perhaps suffering is the only thing you truly own. And yet, every morning you rise. Because the fields still need planting. Because the cows still need milking. Because the children still need feeding. And because there is no other choice. The horror of your world is not always sudden. Often it is slow. Slow like rot. Slow like winter's breath sneaking under the doorframe. Slow like your body giving up one joint at a time. There is the horror of your own aging, if you live long enough to experience it. Aging is not a graceful descent in your world. It is a collapse. Your body was old before you reached 30. Your back curved after your first years of carrying grain sacks, bending over fields, lifting buckets of muddy water from the well. Your joints grind together like dry millstones. Your hands are curled into claws, stiff and swollen from years gripping tools with handles that never quite fit. You cannot afford to rest. Rest is for the dead. You keep moving because hunger demands it, because your children are still small, because the fields still whisper for your labour. You shuffle slower every season, every winter stealing a little more of your breath. Your teeth rot early. You lose them one by one, each extraction done with a heated iron or a set of dull pliers by someone who may have once helped skin a goat and now calls himself a healer. The wounds often fester. You try not to let your screams wake the children. A mouth without teeth cannot chew the hard bread you bake, so you soak it in thin broth and gum at the scraps like a dog gnawing a bone. Your eyesight dims long before your final decade. You squint into the fields, unable to see the small weeds stealing life from your crops. Your hearing falters. You hear your name whispered when no one is calling you. The young begin to speak over you, assuming you cannot hear, often correctly. But you pretend not to notice because pride has no place here. The horror of aging is not just what your body does, it's what others do when they see you failing. You become less valuable, less capable, less necessary. Your voice carries less weight. Your labour is slower. Your family starts to discuss things quietly after you leave the table, and you pretend you do not hear them. If you're fortunate, your children care for you. If not, you slowly disappear. You still wake, still work where you can, but your days grow smaller, your meals thinner. You sit more often by the hearth, listening to the younger ones plan the planting without asking your opinion. One winter you will not wake at all, and that will be your ending. Not tragic, not sudden, simply another thread quietly snipped by time. You will not be remembered by historians. You will not be marked by more than a wooden cross. Your name may vanish within a generation. This too is horror. The horror of erasure. The world you inhabit is built to forget you. The Lord remembers his titles. The priest remembers his scrolls. The king remembers his wars. But your life, your labour, your suffering, these are nothing more than background noise to them. You have no books, no portraits, no family crests. The story of your existence is told only in the calluses of your hands and the children you leave behind to repeat the same story in the same fields under the same burdens. Even if you were to cry out, to demand recognition, justice, fairness, your voice would not echo beyond the village walls. There are no scribes waiting to record your pleas, no courts waiting to hear your grievances. Your life slips into history like a stone into deep water, the ripples gone before anyone notices they existed. The horror of your world is its indifference. You do not live under one single villain. There is no singular tyrant plotting your suffering from a castle window. The priest is not cruel because he enjoys it. He is simply another gear in the same machine. The steward does not whip you because he hates you personally. He simply follows orders handed down by those who follow orders given to them. The Lord taxes you not because of malice, but because he too is taxed by those above him. Every person in power is obeying someone else. The hierarchy consumes everyone, but you are simply closer to the ground where the weight presses hardest. Even when disasters strike, There is no one to blame, no courtroom, no rescue. The hail that destroys your crop does not answer to your prayers. The wolves that drag away your lamb do not fear your grief. The stream that floods your home carries no guilt as it drowns your remaining grain stores. You do not face villains. You face systems. Systems too large to see. Systems as old as the stones beneath your feet. Systems that no one questions, because questioning is a fast way to be declared dangerous. And so horror becomes ordinary. You do not scream. You do not rebel. You endure. The absurdity is that everyone knows this. The priest knows. The Lord knows. The steward knows. Your neighbours know. They suffer the same, but no one dares to name the absurdity aloud. The miller charges you to grind your grain. The baker charges you to bake your bread. Both are peasants like you, trapped like you, but both must extract your labour because someone is extracting theirs. The steward extracts from them because the Lord extracts from him. The church extracts from the Lord because Rome extracts from the church. It is a ladder of mouths eating one another, and you are simply the last one in line, scraping at the floor for crumbs. The absurdity is that every person above you praises your suffering as virtuous. Your poverty, they say, is holy. Your humility is righteous. Your hunger is God's will. Your labour is your path to heaven. The priest tells you that your suffering brings you closer to Christ, who also suffered. The Lord speaks of duty, reminding you that obedience is honourable. Even your neighbours, equally broken, remind you that the world has always been this way and always will be. They call your misery natural. They call your agony divinely ordered. They call your exploitation the way of things, and you dare not disagree. Because disagreement is dangerous. You know what happens to those who question the order? You've seen men whipped for speaking too freely. You've seen women burned for suggesting the world should change. You've seen the iron masks clamped over mouths that spoke the wrong words. You've seen neighbours vanish into silence after being dragged away at night. And so you bow. You confess. You nod along with sermons about obedience and patience, even as your stomach growls and your hands crack open from frost. You pretend to find comfort in the promise of heaven, while your bones splinter beneath you. Even your hopes have been shaped for you. You do not dream of freedom. You do not imagine justice. You do not hope for wealth. You hope for small things. That this winter will not starve your children. That your wife survives her next childbirth. That your Lord forgets to raise taxes this year. That the wolves avoid your herd. That the stream doesn't flood. You hope for survival. Because that is all you have ever been allowed to hope for. The horror of your world is not in grand atrocities, but in the crushing weight of the ordinary. Ordinary pain, ordinary fear, ordinary silence. It is not one bad year. It is every year. It is not one bad lord. It is every lord. It is not one cruel law. It is every law. And through it all you endure, not because you are strong, but because you have no choice. You survive day after day, because survival is the only rebellion you are permitted. The horror of your world isn't always born from punishment or catastrophe. Sometimes it's born from the rules themselves, because you do not live by rules that protect you. You live by rules that trap you. You live inside an invisible box where every side is guarded by the church, by the Lord, by your neighbours, and by the weight of tradition that you dare not question. You cannot leave your village without permission. You cannot refuse your Lord's demands. You cannot challenge your priest's authority. You cannot decide who you marry, where you work, or even where you worship. Every choice you make has already been made for you. The system exists not to serve you, but to consume you. And somehow, this is not seen as cruelty, it is seen as order. Order brings peace, they tell you. Order prevents chaos. Order maintains the will of God. But the order is absurd. You labour from before the first light of dawn until after the sun has disappeared behind the trees. You bend your back in the fields 6 days a week, and on the 7th you bow your head in church, while the priest explains why your suffering is part of God's plan. You offer tithes to a church that owns land you will never see. You pay rent to a lord who lives behind stone walls you will never enter. You give your remaining scraps to your children, knowing they will grow up only to inherit the same burdens that now suffocate you. You do not rebel because you have no language for rebellion. The very idea of questioning the structure of the world has been stolen from your mind before you could even form it. You were told as a child that to challenge your place is to challenge God's design. And what peasant would dare challenge God? Your ancestors lived this way. You live this way. Your children will live this way. Children, the cycle turns like the millstone grinding your Lord's grain, endlessly, mercilessly, without pause. And yet, even while trapped inside this brutal system, you are surrounded by hypocrisy so absurd it no longer even surprises you. The priest preaches humility while drinking wine you cannot afford. The Lord demands loyalty while raising your taxes to pay for his feasts. The steward demands obedience while pocketing coins that should belong to the manor. The miller, your neighbour, cheats you at the scales while speaking of brotherhood. Everyone above you sins freely while demanding purity from you. The priest forgives his own failings in confession. The Lord pardons his own cruelty as duty. The steward excuses his greed as necessity. The miller laughs behind closed doors while you starve. And yet you are the one expected to confess, to repent, to suffer gladly. Even when justice arrives, if it arrives as theatre, not truth. You have seen men tried for crimes they did not commit, while those guilty of worse remain untouched. You have seen neighbours flogged for failing to meet impossible quotas, while the steward quietly steals from the harvest. You have seen women accused of witchcraft for nothing more than surviving too long after burying too many children. Guilt is not determined by action. Guilt is determined by position. The poor are guilty because they are poor. The powerless are guilty because they are powerless. You have stood in the village square and watched punishment delivered as entertainment. Public floggings, stocks, the scold's bridle, even executions. You have seen grown men scream as their flesh is stripped away while children watch wide-eyed beside their mothers. You have seen women paraded half naked through the streets to be mocked and spit upon for imagined crimes. You have seen men swing from the gallows while the crowd murmurs prayers for mercy that arrives too late. The punishment is not only about the guilty, it is about reminding the rest of you what happens when you forget your place. You bow your head not because you accept your guilt, but because you fear their power. You confess sins you didn't commit because it's safer than silence. And always hanging behind this absurd world is the unrelenting presence of death. You do not fear death like the nobles fear it. To them, death is an interruption of comfort. To you, death is simply part of the landscape. Like the trees, like the rain, like the changing seasons. You have seen death so often, it no longer surprises you. You have seen infants buried before their first winter. You have seen mothers carried to graves after childbirth. You have seen fathers crushed beneath falling trees or gored by desperate livestock. You have seen sickness sweep through entire families in a single fortnight. You have dug the graves yourself, your shovel breaking frozen earth while your own breath fogs the cold air. And yet, even in death, the absurdity continues. The Church tells you that your salvation depends on proper burial, proper prayers, proper payments. A pauper's grave may not buy your soul time in purgatory. A better grave, a more expensive mass, a richer offering to the priest may shorten your torment after death. You do not understand how coins can purchase heavenly favour, but you do not question it. You cannot afford to question it. Even in death, money matters. You've seen families go hungry so they can afford the priest's fees for proper burial rites. You've seen old men die clutching wooden crosses, praying that their children will offer enough at the altar to keep their souls from burning. You've heard priests offer indulgences for a price, promising relief from purgatory while the living starve. And in the deepest corners of your mind, you wonder, if God requires gold to show mercy, what chance do you have? But you do not speak these thoughts aloud, not ever, not even to your wife in the dark, not even to yourself in the silence, because to doubt is as dangerous as to rebel. And so the absurdity continues. Endless, grinding, merciless. You wake each day in the same world, with the same rules, the same injustices, the same rituals, the same suffering. You rise, you labour, you pray, you fear, you survive, and you endure the absurd, because enduring is all you are permitted. The system is broken, but you are never allowed to notice. The horror of your world isn't always loud. Often it's quiet. Not the terror of screams and swords, but of slow, invisible collapse. There is the horror of watching your land betray you. The soil itself seems to resent your existence. You plough it year after year, but it weakens beneath your feet. The thin topsoil blows away with harsh winds. The rains wash channels through your furrows. Each spring, you return to fields that yield less than the season before. And no one comes to help, no one cares. When a harvest fails, and they often fail, there is no government to offer aid, no charity to fill your empty bowls. There is only your Lord's steward arriving to collect his share, regardless of how much remains. You explain that the grain withered in the dry weeks, that the storms flattened half your fields, that the rats devoured your stores. He nods, expressionless. Then he takes your payment anyway. Your cow, your chickens, your tools, even your child's blanket, if that is all that remains. You do not argue. Arguing means punishment. You bow your head, swallow your pride, and pray that next year will be kinder. It rarely is. This is horror by starvation. Starvation doesn't arrive like a sudden guest. It seeps in slowly like cold into a failing roof. The hunger starts as tightness in your belly. You cut back on meals. You tell your children to eat first. You water down the stew one day, then again the next. The bread grows thinner until it becomes more bark flour than grain. Your skin tightens against your ribs. Your breath shortens. Your hands shake even while resting. The smallest tasks leave you dizzy. You dream about food every night. Rich stews, warm breads, roast meat you will never taste again. Your children grow pale. Their bellies swell, grotesquely round beneath spindly ribs. They cry for food you cannot give. Their hair thins, their teeth rot, Their little feet stumble over nothing as weakness overtakes them. And then one morning, one of them does not wake. You bury them without ceremony because you have no strength for mourning. You cannot afford grief. You have others who still need what little food remains. You tell yourself that God is testing you. You repeat the priest's words. You try to believe them. But sometimes, alone in the cold, you wonder what kind of God needs to watch your children starve to be satisfied. You never say it aloud. You never even fully allow yourself to think it. The horror of winter adds its own special weight. Winter is not simply cold. It is an adversary. You wake each morning wondering if this will be the day your roof finally caves under the weight of snow. Your hearth burns weakly because you have no more firewood. The trees nearby belong to your lord, and stealing from his forest risks punishment. You burn scraps, twigs, broken tools, dried dung. The smoke chokes your home, stings your eyes, fills your lungs. You cough. Your children cough. You hope it is not the kind of cough that brings death. The frozen ground yields nothing. The livestock grow thin. You slaughter your weakest animals to stretch the meat as long as possible, knowing that soon even the salted strips will run out. The days are short. The nights feel endless. The wind howls through cracks you cannot patch, rattling the loose thatch above your head, like fingers scraping at the walls. You huddle together beneath a single blanket, your breath hanging in clouds above your faces. You whisper prayers. You mutter old charms. You promise your children that spring is coming, even while your heart wonders if they will live to see it. You count every remaining turnip, every last onion. You scrape mould off hard bread and eat it anyway. You drink weak broth and pretend it is filling. The hunger gnaws at your insides like a small, relentless animal you cannot kill. And when spring finally arrives, you are thinner. Your neighbours are fewer. The horror of your world is not just survival, it's repetition. There is no final victory, no reward for surviving one plague, one winter, one famine. There is only the next one. The plague returns, again and again, like a tide that never fully recedes. The coughs return in the spring, the boils in the summer, the deaths in the fall, the burials in the winter. You bury one child, then another. You marry off your daughter, knowing she's only entering the same trap you live in. You watch your son inherit your fields and your debts. Your hope is not that your children will thrive. It is that they will suffer slightly less. But even that is unlikely. You watch as your lord's demands grow heavier, his taxes higher, his punishments swifter. You watch the priest collect indulgences from families who cannot afford bread. You watch the miller weigh your grain dishonestly while preaching fairness. You watch the world grow crueler year after year, and still you endure. You do not rebel, not because you are weak, but because you have seen what happens to those who try. You've seen men hanged for refusing to pay impossible debts. You've seen women burned for questioning the priest's sermons. You've seen entire families exiled for speaking the wrong words at the wrong time. The horror is knowing that there is no safety except silence. And when you look around, when you see the empty huts where your neighbours once lived, when you see the crosses marking fresh graves in the churchyard, when you hear the distant bells tolling for yet another soul, you realise that this is not a temporary hardship. This is the world. This is how it has always been, how it will always be. And so, you wake, you labour, you suffer, you survive, because survival itself is your only form of resistance. You do not live a life, you endure one. There comes a point where even your own suffering begins to lose meaning. You have lived so long with hunger gnawing at your stomach, with cold seeping into your bones, with fear rattling your sleep, that it becomes part of you. Like your breath, like your heartbeat, constant, quiet, always there. But even as you endure it all, something inside you begins to unravel. At first you hardly notice it. You tell yourself that this is life, that everyone suffers, that God wills it. You repeat the priest's sermons, not because you believe them, but because it is safer to hear the words inside your own head than risk what might fill the silence if you let them go. You tell yourself that better days will come, even as you know that better days almost never do. You do not allow yourself to imagine anything outside of this world. The world beyond your village may as well be a myth. You've heard travellers speak of great cities, of noble courts, of places where people dine on meat every day, where fires burn warm even in winter, where roofs do not leak and bread does not mould. But these places are not real to you. They may as well be stories, like saints performing miracles or angels visiting from heaven. They do not belong to you. You belong to the fields. You belong to the cold. You belong to the suffering. And so you tell yourself to endure. But endurance wears thin. It begins with exhaustion, deeper than the exhaustion of work. A kind of hollowing out. You wake in the morning, and before you have even left your bed of filthy straw, you feel tired. Not tired from the labour you have not yet done, but tired from the knowing. Knowing that today will be no different than yesterday, that you will pull the same plough, mend the same fence, scratch at the same bites, swallow the same weak broth, whisper the same desperate prayers. There is no destination ahead of you, no goal you are moving toward. There is only the repetition, the endless sameness of survival. You feel yourself disappearing beneath it, a slow, quiet collapse. Your laughter becomes rarer. Your voice grows softer. You no longer argue with your wife about things that do not matter. You no longer scold your children for failing to work fast enough. You simply move through your tasks like a shadow, present but fading. You stop looking at the stars. You stop noticing the seasons change. You stop imagining anything except the next mouthful of food. There is a kind of numbness that settles over you, a grey fog inside your skull. And yet, as numb as you become, you still see the world's cruelty more clearly than ever before. You see how the Lord Steward sneers when he arrives to collect taxes, how his boots remain clean while yours are caked with mud, how his horse feasts on better grain than your children, how his guards watch you with lazy contempt, hands resting casually on the hilts of their swords. You see the priest's belly growing larger as your children grow thinner. You watch him drink sweet wine from the altar while you stretch your last flask of weak beer across the month. You hear him speak of God's mercy while standing over your neighbour's fresh grave. You see the miller's thumb press ever so slightly on the scale, stealing a bit more grain from every sack. You see the blacksmith charge you twice what you paid last year, because he knows you have no other option. You see your neighbours nod along, pretending that fairness still exists, because they are too afraid to do otherwise. And you wonder sometimes if everyone is lying. If the Lord lies, if the priest lies, if the world itself lies. You wonder if there ever was justice, if there ever was hope, if God hears any of your prayers, if God exists at all. And when that thought surfaces, even for a moment, you feel terror bloom in your chest. Not terror of God's wrath, but terror of what it would mean if he truly isn't listening, if he never was. You do not allow yourself to stay with that thought for long. It is too large, too dangerous, too empty. And so you return to the numbness, you return to the routine, you repair the fence, you mend the leaking roof, you patch your son's tunic, you scrape the mould from the last wheel of cheese, you carry the bodies to the graves, you recite the same prayers, you plant the same seeds, you watch the same clouds, you watch your wife's face, worn thin by years of labour, lines etched like cuts across her skin, her hands swollen and red from endless work. You listen to your children's hollow coughs as they sleep beneath a thin blanket. And you pretend, for them at least, that everything will be all right. But you know the truth. You know that winter will return, that sickness will return, that the steward will return, that hunger will return, that death will return. You know that nothing will change, and somewhere deep inside you, something small breaks. You don't cry, you don't scream, you don't fall to your knees and wail to the heavens. You simply feel the weight shift, the final surrender of hope, the acceptance that your life is not a story. There is no lesson, no redemption, no reward. There is only the endless, pointless machinery of suffering. And yet you wake, because you must. Because there is no alternative. Because the collapse inside you isn't enough to stop your hands from working. Not yet. You learn to live with collapse. Not because you have mastered it, but because you have no other choice. At some point, you stop calling it collapse. You stop naming it altogether. It simply becomes your state of being, a dull hum of exhaustion, of grief you no longer allow yourself to feel, of hopes you no longer allow yourself to have. Your world shrinks. There was a time, perhaps long ago, when you allowed yourself to imagine futures. Small ones, not grand futures, of course. Those belong to kings and lords, but modest ones. A larger hut, a second cow, a harvest so good that you might store enough grain to survive the next winter without rationing by candlelight, a day without hunger gnawing at your ribs, a winter without losing a child. But slowly, one by one, even these small dreams begin to rot. Every time you dared hope for an easier season, you watched as floods drowned your fields, or storms ripped through your roof, or blight blackened your grain into poison. You've watched your neighbours die of diseases that strike with no warning, no cure, no mercy. You've buried too many children to believe that any child's future is guaranteed. You stop picturing next year. You stop picturing next month. You stop picturing tomorrow. You focus only on the next task, the next fence post that needs repair, the next bucket of water to draw from the well, the next loaf of bread that must stretch across too many mouths, the next hour. This is how you survive, by shrinking time until it becomes small enough to bear. And while your world shrinks, so too does your sense of self. You're no longer a person in the way you once imagined. You're not a man with dreams, or a woman with ambitions. You're a body that labours, a mouth that chews, a set of hands that tills and mends and carries, a pair of feet that walks, a back that bends. Your identity dissolves into the work, into the routine, into the silence. Even your face changes. You catch glimpses of it sometimes, in the reflection of still water, or the dim shimmer of polished iron. You barely recognise it anymore. The hollowed cheeks, the sunken eyes, the cracked lips and broken teeth, the skin, thick with calluses, pocked with old scars, creased from constant exposure to wind, sun, and cold. The person you once were, the child who laughed, who dreamed, who wondered, feels impossibly distant, as if that person died long ago, and you're simply what remains. The laughter is gone from your home. When you and your wife speak, it's in brief, clipped phrases. Has the fence been repaired? Did the cow produce milk today? Is there enough bread for tomorrow? Is the child's fever breaking? Is the roof holding? There are no stories, no idle conversation, no wasted words. Even love begins to fade, not because it dies, but because you no longer have the energy to feed it. Love becomes duty. It becomes the shared labour of survival. You care for one another as co-workers in suffering. There is comfort in that, but little joy. And yet, despite everything, you envy your children. Not because they have more, they have even less than you did at their age, but because they still carry that fragile spark of not knowing. They still play sometimes, chasing each other through the mud, laughing as if the world were not a collapsing prison. They do not yet understand how heavy their lives will become. You watch them play with a mixture of love and quiet grief, because you know what is waiting for them. The plough will find them soon enough. The hunger, the fear, the endless, merciless repetition. They will bury you one day, if they are lucky enough to survive that long. And then they will carry your burdens on their own backs. You do not wish it for them, but you have nothing else to give. There is no inheritance except endurance. You teach them to pray as you are taught, to bow before the priest, to obey the steward, to give the Lord his due, to never speak against the order of things. You tell them this not because you believe in justice, but because you know that disobedience is dangerous. The world may not reward obedience, but it punishes defiance. Even your prayers have changed over the years. You no longer ask for abundance. You no longer ask for peace. You ask only for survival, for one more season, for one more child spared, for one more loaf of bread. You ask for less, and even that feels greedy. Sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind screams against the walls of your hovel, and your stomach gnaws at itself, you allow yourself to wonder what it might feel like to stop enduring, to lay down the burden, to sleep, to let the cold take you. But even these thoughts fade quickly, chased away by the cries of a hungry child, or the creaking of the roof that demands repair, or the growl of your wife as she rises to stoke the fire yet again. And so you stand, you work, you survive. Not because you want to, but because you must. Because in this world, survival isn't a gift. It's the only thing you have. By now, you've lived so long inside your own slow collapse that you've forgotten what it feels like not to be exhausted. You no longer dream of escape. You no longer believe in relief. You have stopped even noticing the weight that presses on your shoulders, because it has been there for so long that it feels like part of your body. The absurdity of your world no longer shocks you. It simply is. You do not question why the steward collects more grain than your field produced, or why the priest grows fat while your child's bones press against his skin, or why the miller takes his crooked share and still sings hymns at Sunday Mass. You do not question why the Lord's hunts trample your crops, or why his soldiers steal your hens and laugh as you bow to them. You have learned to call injustice normal, because what choice do you have? There is no authority you can appeal to, no distant king who might intervene, no heavenly justice that arrives before your children starve. Even God's justice, you are told, is reserved for after you die, and only if you have obeyed perfectly. And so you obey, you always obey, even your rage has withered, it no longer burns. It simply sits inside you, heavy and cold. You still feel the bitterness rise sometimes. When your neighbour's son is whipped for stealing a handful of grain, while the steward rides by on a horse fed with stolen harvests. When your wife buries another child, while the priest speaks of God's mercy. When your Lord holds a feast while your village burns. But the rage leads nowhere. You swallow it, you let it sink. Because you know what happens to those who speak too loudly. You've seen them. You've seen the man beaten for questioning his taxes. You've seen the woman accused of witchcraft for knowing too many herbs. You've seen the family exiled for saying what everyone quietly thinks, but dares not say aloud. You've heard the rumours about what happens in the dungeons, about iron masks, about the rack, about torches and thumbscrews, about screams that no one dares to acknowledge. You have learned to bow your head, not because you respect your Lord, but because you fear what happens if you lift your eyes too high. The system is not designed to correct itself. It is designed to crush those who notice its cruelty. You do not trust your neighbours, not truly. They are trapped like you. But desperation twists men. When harvests fail and bellies shrink, rumours grow, accusations fly, jealousy festers, a stolen hen, a missing goat, a sick child. Every misfortune becomes a seed for suspicion. You've seen neighbours turn on one another. You've seen friends become accusers. The ones who point the finger first survive a little longer. They feed their children with the scraps taken from the condemned. And you cannot fully blame them, because you know you might do the same if your child were dying. The horror of your world is not only how cruel men can be, but how easily survival demands that cruelty. You witness the hypocrisy of the church as the priest speaks of brotherhood while watching your suffering like it is a sermon illustration. He tells you that God loves the poor while he taxes you to fund new vestments. He preaches that the meek will inherit the earth, while he drinks imported wine and eats salted pork. He reminds you that your suffering will be rewarded in heaven, while he lives comfortably in the present. You dare not question his authority. The church holds the keys to your soul. A priest's accusation can end you faster than a sword. Even your children begin to understand this at a young age. You watch your son learn how to bow properly to the steward, how to avoid meeting his Lord's eyes, how to silence his questions. You watch your daughter learn how to lower her voice, how to keep her head down, how to make herself small in a world where danger is always watching. You have no inheritance to leave them except caution. You teach them how to survive their own collapse. Your own father likely taught you the same, and you wonder sometimes if he once stared at you the way you now stare at your children, with pride, yes, but also with sorrow, knowing what awaits them. You have seen too many burials. You dig graves like other men plant crops. You have lowered tiny bodies into the ground. You have watched as the priest murmurs his tired prayers. You have placed stones where names will not last. The graveyard grows while your village shrinks. Each winter leaves it larger. Each plague thickens its silence. The dead outnumber the living. And yet the wheel keeps turning. The absurdity is not that you suffer. The absurdity is that you continue to suffer year after year, while nothing changes. You plant, you harvest, you starve, you pray, you bury, you repeat, and still, every spring, you press seeds into the soil again, knowing how often the earth betrays you. Perhaps you do it out of habit, perhaps out of duty. Perhaps because without it, you would have nothing left to pretend toward. There is no revolution in your world, no redemption, no rescue. There is only this and the slow drowning in a world that was never built to save you. In the end, collapse doesn't come with screams. It comes with a kind of quiet forgetting. You forget how many winters you've survived. You forget how many harvests you've buried beneath ruined floods or watched wither beneath drought-starved skies. You forget the count of graves you've dug with your own hands, the weight of each shovel full of earth slipping like heavy sand between your fingers. You forget how many of your children's faces you once imagined watching grow old, not because you cannot remember, but because you no longer allow yourself to remember. Memories are dangerous here. Memory feeds longing. Longing feeds hope. And hope is a dangerous thing in a world where nothing ever changes. So you forget. You live by muscle, by habit, by motion. You rise before the sun. You stagger to the fields. You scrape the hard earth for what little it will give you. You mend what can be mended, patch what can be patched, bury what must be buried. You speak little. You expect little. You survive. The faces of your neighbours blur. Many of them are gone now. Some vanished from plague, some from famine, some from quiet deaths inside freezing huts as the firewood finally ran out. The faces who remain grow older and more hollowed with every passing season. The children grow up quickly. The young grow old too soon. The old vanish quietly. And still the wheel turns. The priest's sermons begin to sound like the endless rhythm of rain on a roof. Steady, repetitive, impossible to ignore, but also impossible to take comfort from. He speaks of heaven, as if it were a coin you might someday afford. He speaks of hell, as if you weren't already living inside it. He speaks of patience, as if patience itself were not the very thing choking you. The words grow meaningless, like the empty prayers you now recite by habit rather than faith. The words roll off your tongue, but you no longer listen for an answer. You know better than to expect one. Your Lord rides past your fields from time to time. You bow, not out of respect, but out of instinct. His horse tramples your furrows. His hunting dogs tear through your meagre gardens. His laughter echoes as if he occupies another world entirely. And perhaps he does. You do not exist to him as a person. You exist as an obligation, a labouring shape at the edge of his wealth. Even the seasons mock you. The spring promises renewal, but brings familiar dread. Will the seed sprout? Will the floods ruin it again? Will the pests return? You know the answers, even before the first sprouts break the soil. The summer burns your skin beneath an unrelenting sun. The autumn rushes you to harvest before rot steals what little grew. The winter returns to strip you bare. There is no good year. There are only years you survive, and years you don't. And still you return to the field. Because you must. Because you always have. Because there is nothing else. The absurdity grows so large it becomes invisible. You watch as the steward extracts more than you grew. You watch as the miller steals handfuls of your flour. You watch as your lord's men arrive to take livestock you can no longer afford to feed. You watch as your wife barters what little remains of your dignity in desperate exchanges to keep your children breathing. And through it all, you smile politely. You say the words you must. You nod along with the priest's stories of the kingdom of heaven. You kneel, you obey, you survive, because the alternative is to vanish. And you are not yet ready to vanish. You know what happens to those who speak against it. The dungeons swallow them. The gallows silence them. The stake burns them. The whispers erase them. You have seen too many disappear beneath the heavy machinery of order, a system that demands your suffering but punishes your resistance, and so you endure. But even endurance rots after long enough. What remains is something smaller. Not rebellion, not despair, not hope, simply emptiness. You become a shell that works, a body that moves, a set of hands that labours, a voice that repeats the same prayers, now hollow of meaning. Even grief begins to feel distant, like something you once knew but no longer recognise. The deaths pile like the wood piles you burn each winter, and still you carry on, because you do not know how not to. And sometimes, late at night, as you sit by the embers of your dying hearth, you wonder if you have already died and simply continued working out of habit. You wonder if heaven or hell could possibly feel any different than this. And then, without answers, you rise again. Because the world does not care for your questions. It does not pause for your grief. It does not honour your sorrow. The Lord demands your rent. The priest demands your tithe. The steward demands your labour. The seasons demand your bones. And you give it all. Because you always have. Because in the world of the medieval peasant, to collapse is not an event. It is a way of living. And you live it every day. And still, tomorrow will come. The sun will rise again, casting pale light across the frozen fields. The frost will crunch beneath your boots as you step into the thin grey morning. Your breath will hang briefly in the still air, before vanishing like all things eventually vanish here. You will lift your tools once more, the same way your father once did, the same way your son one day will. The sky will carry no message. The earth will offer no mercy. The seasons will turn, whether you turn with them or not. The Lord will demand. The priest will remind. The steward will count. The grain will thin. The livestock will fall sick. The hunger will return. The cold will return. The same stories again. The same prayers again. The same silence. You will not be remembered. When your time comes, and it will come, there will be no songs, no legacy, no stone bearing your name that will survive beyond a generation. You will be folded quietly into the earth you once worked. The wheel will keep turning. Another winter, another harvest, another funeral, another child born into the same machine, and above it all, the quiet, indifferent sky. The world will continue, and you will be gone, will be.